Saw the whole thing, although not very well. He couldn't identify the killer, but from the description we got from him, we can rule out you.
So, I'm off the hook?
More or less.
Vimes must be livid.
I've seen him happier, but he's still convinced you're involved in this somehow.
I dare say he has a point, actually. But I'm not a cold-blooded killer, whatever he may think. Who was the witness?
A gargoyle up on the roof of the clerk's office on Salis Street.
What did he see?
I'm not supposed to discuss that with you. Come on, let's get you out of here.
You won't get any arguments from me. The other side of the wall was another cell, but nothing like the holding cell. This was full of sketches and models, tools and materials. It looked more like a workshop, and there was someone working in it. I grabbed the first thing that came to hand and prepared to knock him out.
Oh, thank you. I was looking for that. Would you like a cup of tea?
No, thanks.
Are you sure? Or are they not drinking tea outside anymore?
Outside?
The city. I take it you're from the city. How is it? Same as ever, I suppose.
You're Leonard de Quirm.
Yes, I am. Hand me that metal twisting handle with adjustable jaws, please.
What?
The tool on the table.
Oh, here you go. I'd found Leonard de Quirm. The man was almost a legend. There was no disputing that Leonard was a technological genius. But this meant he was as dangerous to the precarious stability of ankh-morpork as a compulsive smoker in a firework factory. Rumor had it that the patrician had locked him in a nice airy cell for everyone's safety, because Leonard was the kind of guy who'd light any fuse for the innocent pleasure of seeing what kind of bang he could make. The only other thing I could recall was that although the guy was hot stuff with the nuts and bolts, he was definitely at the bottom of the class when it came to thinking up names. The patrician keeps you imprisoned here,
Sorry?
You're working for the patrician?
Not really. He calls from time to time and has a look at some of my sketches. Nice man. He keeps me abreast of events on the outside.
What's that you're working on?
This is my flapping wing flying device. I built a small prototype out of gutta percha strips, twisted tightly together, and it worked. Although not very well. Now I'm building a full-scale model.
Does it fly?
Not yet, but once I've solved the problem of the weight of the holding it together frame and the mechanical faults with the spinning blades radiating from the central hub, it should do. I was having trouble getting enough force to twist the blades together, but the troll the other week sorted that out for me.
Troll?
Yes. He was staying in your room before you. He made this window for me so I could watch the birds. Always good for inspiration are the birds. Not that I don't have enough inspiration as it is. Damn things. Just once I'd like to wake up without finding my sheets covered in sketches of novel designs for apple peelers.
Did you give the troll some metal strips by any chance?
Yes. He made them into a metal hook with prongs, I believe. Not one of my designs.
His name was Malachite.
Was it? It's possible. I never was good with names.
At that moment I thought I heard the sound of someone at the door to my cell. My heart leapt to my throat and narrowly missed my tonsils. I had to get back to my cell, and fast. Hello again, Leonard.
Hello. I'm afraid I had to go back to the drawing tablet with the spinning blades radiating from central hub. It was too heavy. The device flew all right, but only in a downward trajectory.
That is looking like some kind of fluttering machinery.
Yes, I call it a flapping wing flying device, but it isn't working yet.
May I take a look?
Be my guest.
Are you to be considering the increasings of the wingtitude?
The span of the wings? I considered it, but the weight is still the problem.
What if you be using bombastic wood for the frame? It hadn't occurred to me that two conkers would have any practical skills, but I guess you didn't carry out complex excavations without learning a thing or two about engineering. I left him to get to know Leonard and hooked up with Ilsa. She had a deal to keep. Hello again, Leonard.
Yes. Hello?
What are you doing?
I'm deeply immersed in a mechanical problem.
Can I help?
It's not likely.
I kept waiting for him to say something else, but he was lost in his work. Can I ask you a few questions?
Well, we are a little busy at the moment. Can it wait?
How long?
Just a day or so.
No, then it can't wait.
Very well. What did you want to know?
Just a few more questions, if you wouldn't mind. What is that thing you're working on?
It's my flapping wing flying device. I had put it to one side. but I had an inspiration and decided to go back to developing it.
What was the inspiration?
It occurred to me that if I modified my turning the wheels with pedals and another wheel machine to turn the spinning blades radiating from central hub...
Will it work?
If we can to be solving the minor problems, it might just maybe will be yes.
What are the problems you're experiencing?
Mainly weight. If it is going to fly, it has to be light. But two conkers had suggested using bombastic wood for the frame, which is extremely light for its strength. I have to raid one of my floating designs to get enough of the stuff, but it should work.
If weight is a problem, why does it seat two people?
The patrician said he would be most interested in the device if it could be used to fly two people.
You don't know why?
Well, he said he was interested in how far you could travel in it.
Could you fly a long distance in it? Come to think of it, I suppose veterinary might be interested in getting a long way from the city in a hurry one day.
I imagine you'd get very tired. Still, if it were moving over a flat surface, you might get some additional lifting things up force reflected off the ground, which would mean it would be easier. I call this the reflecting some of your lifting things up force off the ground effect.
Well, this is all very interesting, but it isn't helping my case much. I found the golden sword I was looking for. It had a slightly curved blade and seemed to have quite a heavy end.
Sounding like a falcon.
A falcon?
I believe he means a falchion.
Yes, to be a typing of blade for slashing. Like a scimitar, but with weight at end.
With a weighted end.
Thanking you.
I still haven't worked out what this is for.
That's nice.
To be a coin from Sota. That much is clearing. Had one at Dig in Sota, just like that.
Are you sure it's a coin?
Sureness hard to be.
You got that right. This jewel that you're looking for, Two Conkers, are you sure it's here in ankh-morpork?
As suring as I can to being. Found inscription in hole, in Dig, in Sota, leading to city, here.
And what language was the inscription in?
Inscription in Sortian is being.
And how well do you speak Sortian?
Oh, at leasting as well to be speaking your language.
That's what I thought. Either of you heard of Nylon Athatep?
That's a familiar name. I believe that's the name of one of the old dark gods.
Do you know anything more about it?
Sorry, no.
Do either of you know anything about an octagram of murders?
The occult in octagram of importance to summitry.
Octagrams are important to summonings?
That is of much correctness.
Thanks, but I guess I already knew that. Do either of you know a symbol that looks like a sort of wavy star with an eye in the middle?
To be of certitude.
What is it?
It is to be believed as symbol with prehistoric oranges.
It's very old, is that what you're saying?
Of much yesness.
You don't know what it means?
Laminatedly no.
Do you know where Ilsa is?
To be knowing is not the me I am in.
You don't know?
No.
I think that's the first time I've heard a straight answer out of you. Do either of you recognize this?
Is of much familiarness.
From where?
Near sort being, somewhere near. Ha! Yesness. Seal on temple in Alkali.
It's the seal on the doors of a temple?
May I see?
Sure. Why not?
Yes, I recognize that. That's from the temple with the intricate door locking mechanism, isn't it? Quite a marvel of technology for the era it was built, those doors. I was very impressed with them. Now, what was the name of the god it was dedicated to? I can't quite remember.
I know.
I am sure you do, but give me a moment and it'll come to me.
I think he meant it's from the Temple of Anu Anu.
Yes, I remember. The Temple of Anu Anu at Al-Khali. A lovely building.
And this is a replica of the seal.
Of much sureness. Replica of most exactitude.
That might be helpful to know. Thanks. Is there anything else you can remember about the Temple of Anu Anu at Al-Khali?
I'm afraid all I was interested in was the mechanism that operated the door. There was a complicated method of opening the temple doors involving applying pressure and twisting the temple's seal. I didn't really pay any attention to anything else.
Do you remember the method?
Oh, no, that was years ago. I'm sure you could look it up somewhere, though.
Anything else?
It is to be abandoning.
The temple is going to be abandoned?
No, it's to be abandoning in the nowness.
It's abandoned.
That is of the most truthy flavor.
Do you mean it's been abandoned for centuries?
Of much error, no. Abandoning of the weeks.
They abandoned it a few weeks ago.
Your truth is whole.
Why would the followers of Anu Anu stay here in the Temple of Small Gods, if there was a magnificent temple in Al-Khali they could go to?
Not to be knowing by me.
Does the phrase quod nescient eos interficit mean anything to you?
Where is that familiar to?
You recognize it?
Yesness. It is to be the motto of one of the elder cults. I am not remembering of which.
A cult, not the cult of Anu Anu.
Oh, with sureness that is not to be so. Older cult than that even, but cannot be remembering of what.
What do you make of this?
Where you this did get?
You recognize it?
Not sword, no, but indenting at end of handle, same shape as gold-plated jewel I is being searching for.
You're telling me that a gold-plated jewel belongs in the pommel?
It would be seeming so.
Interesting. Have you heard of the radiant trapezohedron?
What is this being?
Well, I don't really know. It's a source of great power. That's the only thing I'm sure about.
What is being a trapezohedron to mean?
It's a type of crystal in which all the faces are trapeziums.
And a trapezium?
A type of quadrilateral with no parallel sides.
No, that's a trapezoid.
No, a trapezoid has two parallel sides of different lengths.
That's a trapezium.
No, it's not.
Where are your family from anywhere near Genoa?
My grandfather was. What's that got to do with anything?
Genuine geometry has slightly different definitions to Ephebian geometry. I tend to go by Legibus's definitions in his Geometries. Have you read it?
This trapezodendron.
Trapezohedron.
All sides would be consisting of squashed squares.
Well, that's a slightly crude summary, but essentially correct.
That's it. That's the jewel I am being seeking.
Really?
Much yesness. Just like that is being, but with gold platings.
And you were looking for this, right? How close were you to finding it?
I am of some sureness that it is to being in ankh-morpork, and I am of the believing that this arrangement of stars is of great importance in its discoverage.
Can I see that?
Please, take if you wishing. I am not to be having much chances to look myself now. I would be of delighted nature if you would continue the looking for me.
Where did you get this star map from?
After much researching, found tale of lost night and jewel. Resting place of jewel to be dictated by these stars.
And that's all you know?
Never managed to be deciphering.
Well, I'll see what I can do. Does this mean anything to either of you?
That symbol is of familiarness to me. I am of fear that I cannot remember what it is to be.
Anything you remember could be useful.
The symbol is being called the Eye of Three Lobes. That much I am remembering.
Well, that's something. The three-lobed eye. One of the books in the library had mentioned that the symbol of the dark sect of Nylon Ethatep was a triple-lobed eye. I found that jewel you were looking for.
Really? May I be seeing it?
You can have it if you like. But first I have to get the sword back. Do you have any ideas?
Where is it to be?
A troll named Horst has it. I have no idea where he is.
I don't think I can be helping you.
I am sorry, what did you say? I wasn't listening. Yes, you can use it if you like.
You didn't listen to a word I just said, did you?
Be my guest.
What are you being said?
What? Sorry, I was a little distracted. That might just work.
It may to be of much sureness.
Never mind. I knew full well that asking either Leonard or two conkers about any of the murders would be a waste of time.
I'm sorry? The name means nothing to me.
I wouldn't to be knowing anything what that was about.
When I went back to Leonard's cell, it was lacking a large part of the wall. The disc quake must have taken its toll on the palace. Leonard and two conkers were still working on the flapping wing flying device like nothing had happened. The contraption that Leonard and two conkers had been working on was my only chance.
Well, it's finished. Now all we have to do is fly it.
And I'm volunteering.
Ah, hello again. You want to be the person in the seat that guides the device?
I'm going to have to be.
We still need somewhere long and flat to launch it from.
I'll see what I can do. There wasn't much point talking to Leonard or two conkers until I'd sorted out somewhere to launch the contraption from. I've cleared the rubble off the roof. Can we launch this from there?
It might just work.
Give me a hand moving it out there and we'll see what happens.
Are you any closer to a solution for our mutual problem?
No, sir. I've been occupied.
Indeed. And what could occupy you?
There was a string of copycat killings. I've been trying to solve them.
And have you?
No. My lead suspect was killed.
That is very unfortunate. So there has been no progress in determining who killed Cypher.
Not as such.
I had been given to understand that this was precisely the situation you were well equipped to handle.
I will solve this case, sir. You can count on me.
Do you recall what I said the city reminds me of?
You said it reminds you of a clock, sir.
Indeed. Big wheels and little wheels, all turning at different speeds to keep the machine working. That, after all, is the most important thing. The machine keeps going.
You've told me this before.
Do you know why it keeps working?
Because you want it to keep working?
I'm flattered that you think I have such importance. But no, it keeps running because the people believe it will keep running. Faith is a powerful force.
There is a point to this, sir?
I always have a point. Sometimes it's sharper than others.
I'm sorry. Continue.
One of my clerks has been found face down in a vat of wine, and that makes it appear as if the administration has lost control.
And the administration is me, right?
We are all the administration. You do the work, and I take both the credit and the blame. Provided I do not take the blame, I am content. I trust I make myself clear.
Perfectly.
Suddenly I could smell blood. It filled up my senses like a night in a forest. Except a night in a forest didn't make me want to tear someone's throat out. I didn't know whether the guard had cut himself or if I was just developing a healthy bloodlust, like any young werewolf. But I couldn't control myself. The next thing I knew, I was in my office. I had no idea how I got there, how I got my coat out of the palace, or where I'd got a traffic cone from. It had been that sort of night. Two conkers, get the flapping wing flying device ready. It's going on another flight. Oh, as you are wishing.
Where are you going?
I'm not going anywhere, but you are. The Assassin's Guild still has a contract out on your husband's head, and they won't stop until he's dead.
Let him go. I'll stay here with you.
I can't offer you much of a life, but he can.
I love you, Luton.
Yeah, I know. But love isn't always enough. If you don't get on that flying machine, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, and for the rest of your life, which won't be very long if the Assassin's Guild catches you.
What about us?
We'll always have the Hotel Pseudopolis. We didn't for a while. We lost it. But we got it back. And no one can take that away from us. Here's looking at you, Ilsa. When I flew into the portal, all I could think about was Ilsa. I thought that was the end, and for that brief moment, I was happy. The next thing I knew, the device and I were tumbling from the sky. It was 1,000,000 to 1 chance that I could land it safely. But on the Discworld, 1,000,000 to 1 chances happen 9 times out of 10.
Nice landing, Luton.
Who do you think you are? My guardian angel?
Oh, I lost my wings a long time ago.
Did you see where the flapping wing flying device landed?
Up on the roof, I think.
On the roof? That's just around from where I started. What are the odds against that?
About 1,000,000 to 1, I should think.
Come on, we have to get up there.
You're the boss.
It wasn't easy getting back to the palace. My original launch had attracted a lot of attention. Remora was hanging around outside the palace talking to the guards, but I guess he was finding them as distracting as I had, because he didn't see Gaspode and I slip by. I'd saved the city, but that didn't change things with Remora. If I didn't get out of the city, there was no telling what he'd do to me. Well, it's over.
You really loved her, didn't you?
I don't know. It doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, don't ask me either. I mean, I'm a species that thinks someone's leg is an object of desire.
Thanks, Gaspode. You know, this could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Don't push your luck, sonny boy.
One thing about living in ankh-morpork I could never stomach. All the damn dogs.
Carlotta, Monday, Milka, stranger asking questions, 2 mysterious passengers, murders, Alkali, Malachite, Therma, Madame Lodestone, Selaci Family Mausoleum, Ilsa and Two Conkers, Missing Companion. Therma is buried in the Selaci vaults. Count von Uberwald, Sapphire lied. Reagan's carriage, Something in the river. Mundy's murder, Mundy hung upside down and killed. Azil, counterweight killings. 3712V, Sapphire's money. Sapphire's secret meeting, losing streak. Meeting with Therma, Jasper Horst. Golden sword. The Milka's cargo, wine barrels. The von Uberwald crate. The Warburg crates. Unseen securities back passage. Gold-plated jewel. Hiding place. Bestial attacker. Reagan's murder. Malachite's murder. Laredo Kronk. Patrician's Clark's murder. Reader of esoteric occultism's murder. Merchant's murder. The sewers. Strange symbol. The eel. 8 great tragedies. Temple of Anu Anu at Al-Kali. Nylonethotep. Octagram of murders. Bedmaker and laundryman. Carlotta is a werewolf. Errata. Dead men's pointy boots. Sypha drowned in a vat of wine. Gaimin strangled in the Merchants' Guild. Matham was poisoned in the Widdershins' wing. Meeting of the True Believers. Inscription. Radiant Trapezohedron. Foyd. Gelid. Come and see the greatest historical tragedy ever told. Antilogy in Cleffatara. Well's masterpiece as 'twas meant to be performed by actors. Eat at Harga's House of Ribs. All you can gobble for $1. Menu available. Famous wherever huge appetites gather and mountainous stomachs rumble. The amazing panacea that cures all known ills. Cut me own throat dibblers, genuine authentic soggy Mountain Dew. Guaranteed to cure all problems or your money back. Ah, there's some small print. Guarantee will not be honored. Based upon the real truth, the King of Ankh, Hwell's most boring play. Learn the ancient mystic art of the Path of the Scorpion. Unique mail-order lessons on this famous self-defense method. By Grand Master Lobsang Dibbler. Missing. Small dog. Answers to the name of Mr. Huggy. The story of the Sortian War, as 'twas ne'er told. Truculus and Cresilic, Hwell's epic, incomprehensible masterwork. Death, war, romance songs. Wanted, bedmaker and laundryman for Unseen University. $2 for each day survived. Contact Mrs. Foames at the New Hall. Wanted by the watch in connection with the sale of genuine authentic soggy Mountain Dew. One CMOT Dibbler of no fixed abode. If you see this man, consider him stocked up and extremely persistent. There's an inscription. Madame Lodestone, singer and retainer of Lord Robert Selaci, taken from us when her house collapsed, returning her to the rubble from whence she came. Not much of an epitaph. Still, it's more than I expect mine will say. I'll probably end up with whatever's written on the cement bag round my feet. Carlotta? Carlotta? She disappeared without even a word. I couldn't work that woman out. Still, she'd found me the tomb, which left me trying to decide whether or not to tell Malachite, which is even now affecting the city with its maddening influence, and came back having stolen a fortune from so-called inferior nations, and then started getting involved in ecclesiastical politics on the proceeds. The watchman had a look of mad dedication about him. It was the kind of look that could only be achieved by someone whose job was so mind-numbingly tedious that their only pleasure came from being blisteringly unhelpful to everyone who came along. The pier was tucked away to the side of the wharf, the kind of thing you see but don't notice. Perhaps I should actually go to the pier first. I grabbed a book from the shelves. Jane's All the World's Siege Weapons. Fascinating stuff. If I was planning to storm a castle and I had the defense budget of a small barony, I picked a book at random. Ahmed the I Just Get These Headaches Book of Humorous Cat Stories. There was something very disturbing about it.
Boards that have lain here for longer than Sir has been alive, and that were first laid before Sir's father was even a glint in the eye of his grandfather, whomsoever that may have been. Whilst in the meantime inadvertently stabbing and poisoning the entire cast in oh so many humorous misunderstandings. A process whose ongoing nature might be swiftly curtailed if they don't shut up right now.
And working my way through fiendish traps and puzzles, and eventually stealing some priceless treasure. Burial chambers, wrecks, caves, lost cities, temples, mines, crypts, mazes, barrows, castles, forts, vaults, swamps, chasms, labyrinths, mountains, mausoleums, tunnels, and dungeons to raid.
The corridor was still there. In a place like this, you couldn't take that for granted. If I wanted to do something in the corridor, I should probably go back out there. Now I'd been signed in as a guest. I could just knock on the hatch and he'd have to let me back in. Why didn't I just go inside? I was officially a guest of the guild. Captain Jenkins hadn't wasted any time. As soon as the cargo was loaded, the Milka slipped harbor like a... Well, it doesn't matter what it slipped like. It was gone.
I'm afraid all wizards look the same to me.
Although with Nobby, even if you tied it down, he'd steal the string.
I was drawn to Mooncath by his religious fervor. He was the kind of man who wouldn't miss a single event in the temple, no matter how trivial. He also struck me as the kind of fanatic who knew 100 words for infidel, and not one for compromise.
Malachite, stabbed in the back repeatedly with crowbar. The lead in The Tyrant, stabbed in the back repeatedly. Not with a crowbar, but it was close enough. Well, I'd better leave you to it. I hadn't given much thought to how I was going to get off the Milka. If I'd known what I had to do, I would never have gone on board in the first place. Not again.
Sir has returned, I see.
I had to attend to some business.
Sir had to attend to some business so urgently that Sir couldn't wait for Mistress Carlotta to see him. Sir is presumably unaware of the customs of Uberwald, where such impoliteness would incite a civil uprising.
We're not in Uberwald.
Sir's perspicacity is blinding. I do believe my knees are weak in trembling awe of Sir's mental powers.
Can I see Carlotta, then?
Sir's ability to try one's patience is exemplary.
Well, can I see her?
I am quite sure Sir can see her, but it remains to be seen if Sir will see her.
After talking to the Count, I met up with Carlotta, and we headed out to the mausoleum. I searched the rafters on a hunch and found what I was looking for. The rest of my missing rope.
An octogram of murders? No, should it? I mean, it's something magical, obviously, but other than that...
It certainly was for Luton.
Carlotta didn't strike me as the gambling kind, but then with her look she could probably gamble with other people's money. Personally, I thought that took the edge out of the experience, but I doubt she cared. The hold was dark and dank, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Whatever I had sensed in the hold, it was gone now. As I stood in the alcove examining the pendant, I felt as if I wasn't alone. It was the same presence I'd felt in the Milka's hold. I could feel the cold touch of death upon me. It was a strangely light touch. Size obviously isn't important, I agree. You are Death, right? Rats have their own death? No offense, I mean, you're very, very intimidating. For a skeletal rat, at least. Still here? That's what I thought. So, do you come here often? I'm sorry, it's not easy to think of things to say to something like you. Well, it's not often I find myself in the sewers talking to a... What are you exactly? Exactly. If you don't mind me asking, were you on the Milka before? I thought so. What were you doing on the Milka? Uh-huh. No, please, go on. Did you see anything? Well, I don't know, anything unusual. Anything else? Yeah, I saw that. And that's here. This is its lair. It can't be very big. That's not very comforting. But I guess that's not your job. Comfort, I mean. I wasn't suggesting you weren't good at your job. I've never looked at it that way before. I couldn't believe it. I was talking to a phantasmal rodent. I hoped he couldn't read my thoughts. He seems easily offended. So what's your connection to the big guy? You're sort of like relatives, then. You probably get together for birthdays and hogwatch night. I'd like to see that. Well, it was nice meeting you. I have to get going. It's not like that. I have a lot of work to do. You too, huh? I have to get going. You too. So, what's it like being the death of rats? You don't get to talk much, do you? I'm trying to find a golden sword. Can you help? Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the last time I saw it, when it was sticking out of my ribs. Can you help me find a jewel? Sorry, I forgot. You're a busy entity. Do you think there's a connection between the creature who made these nests and the beast that killed Malachite and the beast that killed me? Can't you give me a little help? No, I understand. Professional ethics and all. Can you tell me anything about the octagram of murders I'm investigating? Well, no, it's not the rats that are being murdered. That's fair enough, I suppose. I'll be sure to come to you the first time I'm investigating a serial rat killer. Wee Mad Arthur? He's not a serial killer, he's an exterminator. Well, fair point, I suppose. Can you tell me what nylon athatep is? Oh, can you at least give me a hint? What do you know about nylon athatep? I see. Do you know any gods? Know any human gods? Oh, be pedantic, why don't you? I found this in the nest. Do you know anything about it? It was on the Milka, so this thing brought it here for some reason. I could really use some help, you know. Oh, forget I asked. I didn't need to bribe him again. The Milka had been carrying some wine barrels that were shipped to the Café Ankh and some crates under the name Varberg. According to the watchman, they were collected by the Guild of Archaeologists, Antiquarians, and Tomb Evacuators. I guess somewhere was the von Uberwald crates that went with the shipping order, but the watchman didn't know about it, and there was no sign of it in the warehouse. The door was... well, it was a door. What can I say? I could never have made it back past the traps carrying the urns. I decided to leave them safely inside their cabinet. It smelled totally different. I doubted it was the same scent. The two scents didn't match. I knew it was the same scent. That's where I got it from. Well, of course it was the same scent. That's where I first smelled it. Both scents were human. I was pretty sure of that. Both scents seemed to belong to trolls. There was a certain quality that both the scents shared, as if they were not quite of this world. The only similarity between the two scents was that neither belonged to anything living. The two scents had a superficial similarity. Although they were similar, one had a much sharper quality. There was a real volume difference between the two scents. One was more supernatural than the other, though. Only one of them was from something alive, though. I headed back the way I came. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Someone was definitely following me. They were keeping their distance, but I managed to briefly catch sight of the dwarf who was following me. I doubled back on myself, trying to get a good look at the dwarf who was following me. It was Al-Kali. I slipped away into the streets before he realized I'd spotted him. Why should I trust you when you clearly don't trust me?
A strange question, sir, and one that borders on insulting.
Send your cronies to tail me again, and you'll see just how insulting I can get.
Ah, I take it Mr. Al-Kali has been somewhat overzealous in his desire to keep an eye on you.
I don't appreciate being watched.
And I don't appreciate being made to wait, Mr. Luton. Give us the sword. I'm sure you will find that all your other problems will resolve themselves.
All things to those who wait.
Patience, sir, is not something I have ever mastered. You should bear that in mind.
Al-Kali was still following me, but he was concealing himself better since my little discussion with Horst. Even with Al-Kali's death, I still felt like I was being watched. I couldn't see anyone following me, though. I decided it would be better to wait until I was alone in my office before changing. I wasn't going to turn into a werewolf in front of Rodan. I didn't want to change where the guards could see me. I didn't think they'd appreciate it. If I was going to turn into a wolf, I'd better do it where Privitier couldn't see me. I was pretty sure Samael wouldn't mind me slipping into wolf form, but it still didn't feel right. I just couldn't do it while somebody watched. The only reason to turn into a wolf would be to scare Foyd, and he was already terrified. I didn't like to transform in the streets. You never knew who was watching. I didn't have a great deal of self-control when I was a wolf. I'd probably kill the gatekeeper. Actually, that didn't sound too bad. There was probably a downside that I couldn't see yet. I doubted Henning would mind me turning into a werewolf. He probably wouldn't even notice. But it might raise some awkward questions. For all I knew, I might technically be a von Uberwald now. That was a scary thought. I really preferred to get changed somewhere less exposed. I really didn't want the butler to see me change. Although I appeared to be alone, I found it hard to believe I wasn't being watched. I wouldn't trust me with all those valuable books, and the butler certainly didn't. I wasn't about to change in the streets. That would have been positively indecent. The zombie had seen me change 100 times, but I still didn't feel comfortable doing it in front of him. He might be undead, but I didn't feel comfortable changing in front of him. Much as I'd enjoy ripping Mankin's throat out, the Octarine parrot wasn't a great place to change into a wolf. Leonard would probably be fairly nonplussed if I changed into a wolf, but I didn't want to chance it. I wasn't entirely comfortable on the roof as it was. Being a werewolf wouldn't help. Great plan. I'd just change into a werewolf in the Pseudopolis Yard reception. That really wouldn't help clear my name. I didn't want to transform in such an exposed area. With a paranoid like Malaclips at the door, this wasn't a good time to become a werewolf. Not in front of the porter. I'd definitely get thrown out. As I slipped into my wolf form, I smelled blood. Mrs. Foames could probably see me from there. I needed to wait for the right moment. I didn't have time to waste transmogrifying. The fate of the disc was in my hands. I definitely wasn't getting paid enough. Turning into a wolf wasn't something I was entirely comfortable with yet. I was trying to restrict myself to just when it was really necessary. It was the same scent. Definitely the same scent. It smelled exactly the same. I was sure it was the same scent. I'd found a matching scent. Not the same scent. Definitely not the same scent. Al-Kali was still following me.
Silencing those who have found out about the conspiracy to keep the Agatean Empire out of the secret trade talks at Echelfon, thus ensuring that the counterweight continent's stature in the world economy is weakened, which cannot be relied upon to provide accurate perspectives or any true reality should one exist.
The scent of a woman. The fuchsia scent appeared to belong to Ilsa. I didn't know who the fuchsia scent belonged to. Ilsa's scent was a subtle shade of fuchsia. I guess the fuchsia scent might be Ilsa's. It was definitely the scent of a woman. Hoo-ha! I didn't think the fuchsia scent had anything to do with Carlotta. The fuchsia scent didn't seem at all silicious. That means it didn't smell of trawl. Hey, I studied, you know. I wish I could remember what. There was nothing supernatural about the fuchsia scent. The scent was human. There was nothing murderous about the fuchsia scent. It was surprisingly pleasant compared to most in the city. The fuchsia scent was too pleasant to be that. Curiously, there was a faint trace of fuchsia on the star map. There was a certain similarity between the purple and fuchsia scents. They both belonged to women. There was no obvious connection to the fuchsia scent. A strange scent I first found in the cemetery. The killer had got around. Anu had been busy with his murders. Mundy, Malachite, Reagan, Cypher, Al-Khali, Matham, Lucius, me, presumably Gaiman, too. I don't know how he found the time. Whoever this scent belonged to, they weren't normal. This was the scent of my killer. The magenta scent wasn't female. Unless I missed my guess, the magenta scent belonged to the bestial attacker. Nylonathotep had one thing in common with the magenta scent. They were both supernatural. Beyond that, I couldn't be sure. I needed to find out what Nylonathotep was before I could draw any conclusions. Nylonathotep's scent was much deeper than Anu's. What do gods smell like? Don't answer that. The magenta scent was the hot, fetid stench of a beast, not an object. If I wanted to link that murder to this scent, I'd need to check out the crime scene. And what exactly does an arcane symbol smell like? Perhaps I'd had too much whiskey. More likely, I hadn't had enough. Supernatural, yes. Relevant? No. There was definitely some similarity between the magenta and dark magenta scents, but it wasn't clear to me what that connection might be. Although the magenta scent wasn't pleasant, it was in the junior league when compared to the ankh. There was something more supernatural about the magenta scent. The aroma of a very old and slightly damp nursery rug. Eau de Gaspode. Definitely Gaspode scent. Actually, if it was possible, Gaspode smelled worse than sewage. If there was a nice Deathwood for smells, the judges would have a tough call between Gaspode and Nobby for most original odor. Gaspode's stench had style, but the ankh had the volume. It was easy to tell Gaspode's scent from garbage. It would be tougher to decide which I preferred. You couldn't possibly confuse Gaspode's scent with anything else. It was unique. If it could be bottled, it'd be a collector's item. I'd certainly rather collect it than smell it. The rich aroma of Gaspode had little to do with anything. Certainly nothing you wanted to smell. The unmistakable scent of the river Ankh. The citizens of Ankh-morpork are proud of the smell. On a really good day, they carry chairs outside to enjoy it. How can you tell the difference between the smell of the Ankh and the smell of the sewers? For that matter, how can you tell the difference between the ankh and a sewer? The ankh smelled much worse than garbage. Amazingly, the bright cyan scent was probably loud enough to drown out even the smell of the ankh. Although Nobby didn't smell particularly pleasant, well, let's face it, he didn't smell particularly human. No living being could compare to the awesome stench of the river Ankh. The dark magenta stench wasn't as bad as the ankh, but it was far more disturbing. If the dark green scent was a soft whisper, the smell of the ankh was more like the final concert of the band with rocks in. The purple scent was so much more attractive than that. The smell of the ankh was stronger by far. Nothing smelled as badly as the river Ankh. It was unmistakable. A vegetative smell. The scent of a type of moss I found at the site of my murder. Presumably it belonged to a plant of some kind. The lycanthrope came from the sewers, but the dark green scent was probably blotted out by the smell of the ankh. The dark green scent was clearly vegetable in origin. The dark cyan scent was strong and earthy, with a hint of something potent about it. I decided that the dark cyan scent belonged to Sapphire. I didn't know what to make of the dark cyan scent, but it was a deep, earthy smell. There was something vaguely feminine about the scent. But it wasn't Carlotta's. I guess Sapphire must have had Rodan remake her face before going on the lam. Something must have scared her good. There was a faint, dark cyan scent on the bandages. I couldn't be sure, but I thought the bandages had something to do with sapphire. There was a hint of dark cyan on the bandages, but I didn't know what that meant. Not a dwarfish scent. Thinking about it, I was convinced the dark cyan smell was the scent of a troll. Question was, which troll? There was nothing supernatural about this scent. The scent resembled stone more than it resembled metal. The smell didn't suggest precious stones to me at all, but there was something about it that suggested stone. I could believe that the owner of the dark cyan scent was capable of murder, but that proved nothing. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't as bad as the smell of the ankh. I could recognize faint traces of the hideous troll perfume in the dark cyan scent. It seemed that the scent belonged to sapphire. There was a definite similarity between the two scents, although each was distinctive in its own way. It seemed to me that one was a male scent and one a female scent. I was pretty sure that the dark cyan scent had nothing to do with that. The apple-colored scent wasn't entirely unpleasant. The apple-colored scent was probably Menken's. I wasn't sure who the apple-colored scent belonged to. There was something male about the apple scent, but it wasn't likely to belong to Gelid. There was nothing female about the apple scent. The apple scent definitely didn't belong to a dwarf. The apple scent wasn't the scent of a troll. There was nothing especially supernatural about the apple scent. There was no metallic smell in the apple scent. In fact, there was absolutely none of the tangy deep red of iron in the scent. That was pretty odd. Most people had some iron on them somewhere. I was pretty sure that the apple scent belonged to a person, not to a jewel. I had a feeling that the person to whom the apple scent belonged was capable of murder, and that they'd probably get away with it too. But it was all just idle speculation. The apple scent, whilst a little rough, was considerably more pleasant than the smell of sewers. I couldn't make a connection with the apple scent. The cyan scent was distinct and potent. The potent scent of the perfume was far from pleasant and far from subtle. Presumably the cyan stench was pleasant to him. It made sense, but it still horrified me. The perfume was hardly suitable for him. The perfume was hardly suitable for her. The perfume wasn't exactly suitable for that. The cyan perfume was strong enough to drown out the stench of the ankh. I was pretty sure that even the sewers couldn't outdo it for potency. The troll tooth didn't smell much like the perfume. Thank the gods. The cyan scent belonged to the perfume. I had a feeling it could be useful to me. You couldn't possibly get mixed up between the bright cyan stench and any other smell in existence. Perhaps that was the point. I doubted the hideous stench was connected to that. Nobby's teal scent reeked of tobacco. There was no mistaking Nobby's scent. You could tell Nobby's scent from garbage easily. Well, most garbage anyway. The trash outside of a tobacconist's might be a close call, though. Nobby's odor was like no other scent on the disc. I didn't want to start imagining a connection with Nobby's smell. I still had to sleep at night. There was something about the purple scent that reminded me of werewolves. The purple scent was Carlotta's, and from the smell of it she was a werewolf. I guess I owed my new powers to her. I wasn't sure who the werewolf was, but I'd know their scent if I smelled it again. The invite smelled of Carlotta. There was a purple scent around the invitation, but before I was sure it was Carlotta's scent, I wanted to check out the mansion. The purple scent was definitely Carlotta's. The purple scent could be Carlotta's, but I wasn't sure. I had a feeling I was barking up the wrong tree. Were there any troll werewolves? I doubted it. The bestial attacker's scent was quite different. The purple scent could belong to the bestial attacker. I wouldn't put it past Carlotta to be a killer. She certainly had the temperament. Whomever the purple scent belonged to, I had a feeling they could easily be a killer. This scent definitely belonged to something that was alive. The purple scent was quite distinctive. I'd know it if I smelled it again. I didn't know of any connection to the purple scent. Ah, the smell of garbage. An inferior version of the smell of the ankh, in my opinion. Before I became a werewolf, it never occurred to me that different garbage smelled differently. It was just the smell of garbage. It had nothing much to do with anyone. There was nothing metallic about the smell of garbage. Even before I was a werewolf, I knew that jewels and garbage smelled pretty damn different. I can just about imagine finding a murder clue in someone's garbage, but I doubted I could find one in the scent of garbage. The smell of garbage and a goddess? What on the disc made me make that connection? Perhaps I'd watched Trash of the Titans too often. I suspected that the sewers would smell more like the ankh than garbage. The sewers smelled more like the ankh. I thought Welles' plays were trashy, but nobody else seemed to think so. Well, it was certainly trash. The realization didn't help me much, though. The only connection with garbage was the quality of my reasoning. The distinctive bouquet of Ephebian red wine, laden with the subtle fragrance of cabbages and carrots. Definitely red wine. I wasn't sure of the vintage, though. Generally speaking, people don't smell like wine. Well, Cypher did, but that was a special case. Murder has little to do with wine. Murder has little to do with wine. I take back what I said about murder and wine. I had to admit, as a werewolf, there was a certain similarity between blood and wine. Except wine got better with age. With blood, the fresher vintages were tastier. Although superficially similar, there was no mistaking the metallic maroon scent for the sharp smell of Ephebian red wine. I didn't see what that had to do with red wine. I hadn't seen Rodin's scent anywhere but his workshop. I don't think the sculptor got out much. Rodin smelled of clay and a shaky hand. The bandages had a hint of dark blue to them. It wasn't quite the same as Rodin's. There was a faint trace of trawl odor in Rodin's scent, as if he spent a lot of time around them. There was a superficial similarity between the two scents, but I don't think they were connected. They were very different in tone and pitch. I had no reason to doubt that it was Rodin's scent. The maroon scent reminded me of iron somehow. I thought that the maroon scent belonged to Al-Kali. I hadn't worked out who the maroon scent belonged to. Nothing female about this scent. I had decided that it was Al-Kali's scent. It was possible that the maroon scent belonged to Al-Kali. It certainly did seem dwarfish. And he was the only dwarf that had been in my office. It wasn't the scent of a troll, I was sure of that. There was nothing supernatural about the maroon scent. I guess Al-Kali smelled a little like iron because he was carrying a huge iron axe around with him. The maroon scent did have a hint of metal to it. Perhaps whoever it was worked with iron. This was definitely the scent of someone capable of murder. Unlike the scent of blood, the maroon scent didn't fill me with a burning craving for raw meat. They had next to nothing in common. I didn't know of a connection to the maroon scent. The navy blue scent was strong and distinct. The navy blue scent belonged to Commander Vimes. I wasn't sure who the navy blue scent belonged to. The navy blue scent was definitely male. There was a faint hint of dwarf to the navy blue scent. But there was far more to it than that. There were hints of trawl in the navy blue scent, but it wasn't the smell of a trawl. There was something far more down-to-earth about the navy blue scent. Whoever the navy blue scent belonged to, I doubted they were a murderer. There was a hint of teal in the navy blue scent, but nothing convincing. It didn't smell of navy blue. I could see no connection to the navy blue scent. Where Mundy had been in his room, there was a dark blue smell. I suppose it could have been something else, but I was pretty sure that the dark blue scent belonged to Mundy. I was pretty sure that the dark blue scent belonged to Mundy. I was so tired of trying to make connections with Mundy. He was dead. Perhaps I should investigate other things. The earthy brown scent of malachite was unmistakably the scent of a troll. It could be another troll scent, but I was pretty sure it was malachite's. There was no hint of malachite's odor to the bandages. No, I was sure it was malachite's scent. Malachite was dead. What did that have to do with his scent? Malachite could be a killer, perhaps, but not a murderer. He was like a child with a very large body. Even after all this time, the grappling iron still smelled of malachite. The dark magenta scent was deep and sinister. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what the dark magenta scent was. The thing that killed me was scary, but it was nothing compared to the primal terror that the dark magenta scent unlocked in me. I had a sneaky suspicion that the dark magenta scent belonged to Nylonethotep. If I had to put a name to the scent, it would be Essence de Cosmic Horror. I didn't know what Nylonethotep was. How could I compare it to a scent? The dark magenta scent suggested something godlike, but something more insane and horrific. I really didn't want to think about it. The amulet smelled of the deep red of metal, but it seemed to resonate with the dark magenta scent. That didn't make me feel too comfortable about carrying the amulet around. The swords seemed to resonate with the scent, almost as if they were opposed in some way. I got the distinct impression that the sword was like the antithesis of whatever the dark magenta scent belonged to. Don't ask me how I knew that. It's a werewolf thing. If there was a connection, it wasn't one I could see. The jewels seemed to resonate with the dark magenta scent. It almost seemed as if they were singing to each other. I know it doesn't make much sense. Nothing much has recently. The dark magenta scent didn't suggest murder to me. It suggested genocide. The dark magenta scent was like nothing I had ever smelled. It terrified me. There was nothing natural about this scent. The smell of blood was overpowering to me in my wolf form. I was trying to avoid it. I wasn't confident I could tell two different bloods apart, but I knew the smell of blood when I found it. There was a faint smell of blood on the sword. I recognized the blood. It was my own, not the cheeriest of realizations. It didn't smell of blood. As a werewolf, you couldn't get the scent of blood confused with anything else. I wasn't about to start musing wildly about blood. Dark magenta fog. There was a disturbing dark magenta scent in the fish bar, something that resonated with cosmic evil. It scared me. It scared me that anything could have such a disturbing scent. And it scared me that I could tell what color cosmic evil was. Here on the Maudlin Bridge, the reek of the ankh was at its most sickening. Specks of magenta. The smell of the ankh almost drowned out the remains of the magenta scent. The smell of the ankh was too strong for me to pick out the magenta scent well. There was no mistaking it, even against the reek of the ankh. It was the scent of my killer. Dark cyan cloud. Dark cyan was the most prevalent smell in the dressing room. There was a booming bass quality to the scent. The main smell in the dressing room was the same as the scent near the door in my office. It was definitely sapphires. Bright cyan blob. The cyan stench was coming from a bottle of perfume. Faint trace of apple. There was a hint of an apple-colored scent in the air. I guess the apple-colored scent belonged to Mankin. Teal cloud. The cloud of teal-colored scent was the smell of tobacco and petty theft. Definitely nobbies. Maroon traces. The maroon scent wasn't recent. It suggested the tangy red of iron. I decided the maroon scent must belong to alkali. Purple haze. There was a faint haze of purple in the room. I didn't know who it belonged to, but there was something about it. It was the scent of another werewolf. Dark cyan around the door. Around the door was a strong, dark cyan odor, with an earthy overtone. The scent by the door was the same as the one in Sapphire's dressing room. It was definitely Sapphire's. Bright cyan cloud. The scent of the Troll perfume blotted out everything else in the sanctuary. Deep brown discoloration. The place where malachite had been perched smelled of a deep, earthy brown. Blue mist. There was a blue mist around the statue Rodin had been working on. Dense, light green fog. The smell of the ankh was unbearably strong in the sewer, and it was all I could do to remain conscious. All but one other scent was drowned out by the garish strength of the stench. Magenta trail with flashing dots. The trail that I had seen in the cemetery seemed to continue down in the sewers, starting at one of the pipes and disappearing into the passageways. It was almost drowned out by the smell of the ankh, though. Lawn green cloud. The garbage was giving off a distinctive green cloud, not dissimilar to the smell of the river Ankh. Red traces. The empty barrels were surrounded by a cloying red mist, and it had the shrill pitch of red wine, if I wasn't mistaken. The red wine here smelled identical to the wine from the Café Ankh wine cellar. I guess they must be the supplier for the palace. Magenta traces. One of the empty barrels had a faint magenta trace to it. The scent was too weak for me to really remember it. Definitely the same scent as my killer, which meant whoever it was made it into the palace concealed in a wine barrel. Why did that bring to mind the phrase, "You wait, time passes," and Thorin sits down and starts singing about gold? Teal scent. There were signs of a teal scent on the roof. The scent had a distinct hint of tobacco. Nobby just couldn't conceal his odor. The tobacco scent from Mundy's room was the same as the one here, which meant it was probably Nobby's. Navy blue scent. Some parts of the roof had a navy blue scent to them. Definitely Vimes's commanding odor. I guess the navy blue scent had to belong to Commander Vimes. I wasn't sure about the navy blue scent. Dark brown puddle. Around the chalk outline was a brown scent. Presumably malachite's. Magenta scent. There was definitely a magenta hint amongst the scents on the roof. The magenta traces were too weak to be accurately memorized. I was pretty sure that Malachite's murderer was the same as mine. Of course, I survived the operation better than the big dumb troll did. I could tell that my killer had been here. Magenta with flashing dots. The trail led to the Temple of Small Gods. Then I lost it. I'd lost the trail. I couldn't tell where it went from here. Magenta with flashing dots. The magenta trail led to the site of my murder. I guess it must be the murderer's trail. Dark green blob. The green scent smelled like vegetation. The scent seemed to originate from some kind of moss. Beautiful, seductive, and dangerous. Carlotta was worth a stare. She was trouble. What do you know about a woman named Carlotta? Carlotta claimed Mundy was her lover. The question had to be, was she telling the truth? Why would Carlotta have anything to do with the murders? Alkali knew about the Mundy case somehow, so he presumably knew Carlotta somehow. Alkali and Carlotta were associates, whatever that meant. Maybe Carlotta would know her way around the Salaci mausoleum. It was worth a try. I got the distinct impression that there was some tension between Carlotta and the Count. I doubt Carlotta was any stronger than me. I wouldn't put it past Carlotta to have something to do with the killings. I couldn't see why Sapphire would have a secret meeting with Carlotta. There was certainly a link between Horst and Carlotta. The question was, how strong was that link? Was Carlotta also looking for the golden sword? It seemed likely. Carlotta was after the golden sword that Mundy had been carrying. I needed to find out where the sword was now. Carlotta had said that the crate was hers. I didn't have any reason to doubt that. Could Carlotta have been involved in Reagan's death? It wasn't impossible. For some reason I was wasting my time wondering about the connection between Carlotta being a werewolf and Carlotta. It seemed pretty obvious to me. Could Carlotta be one of the true believers? She'd lied to me about so many things. Why not this? Presuming that Carlotta had written the invitation, the writing on it was her handwriting. Carlotta had given me the shipping order, but I wasn't sure I believed everything she'd told me about it. Was it possible the envelope had something to do with Carlotta? If it did, then why was it empty? Even though I'd found the pendant in the sewers, something about it made me think of Carlotta. Maybe it was just a hunch. I was strangely relieved not to find Carlotta's name on the list, even though I wasn't sure what the list of names represented. I had a feeling I wasn't going to like finding out. I knew now that Carlotta was Therma. I should have guessed a long time ago. Carlotta could be Mundy's murderer, but I had to check to see if she had an alibi. Carlotta claimed to be in the Temple of Small Gods when Mundy was slain. I had to check that. Mooncalf had confirmed Carlotta's alibi. It seemed as if she didn't have anything to do with Mundy's murder. I was pretty sure Carlotta hadn't the strength to kill a big troll like Malachite. I had no reason to believe Carlotta had anything to do with that murder. Malaclips had told me that Carlotta was definitely not a worshipper of Errata. Carlotta could be a worshipper of Errata, I guess. I'd have to check. The purple scent could be Carlotta's, but I wasn't sure. As far as I knew, it wasn't Carlotta's scent. There didn't seem to be any obvious connection to Carlotta. Carlotta had hired me to track down Mundy. At the beginning, that was pretty much all I knew about him. Do you know anything about a man named Mundy? Mundy must have had business out of town. But what? The stranger must have had some connection to Mundy. Perhaps the two mysterious passengers could help me find Mundy. What was the connection between Mundy and Al-Kali? Without knowing what the label said, there was no way of knowing if it would help lead me to Mundy. It seemed possible that the scrap of cardboard had something to do with Mundy. I was guessing that Mundy had dropped the torn matchbook in the warehouse. If the matchbook belonged to Mundy, and it seemed likely, then presumably the address had something to do with Mundy. I thought I could work out what had happened. Someone must have told Mundy the address which he wrote on the matchbook. Somehow a scrap of it must have been torn off on the milker, and he must have dropped the rest in the warehouse when he broke in. I had a suspicion if I didn't find Mundy at the address on the matchbook, I'd find something even more interesting. What did that have to do with Mundy? Probably nothing. The milker was the tramp schooner that Mundy had come in on, and I knew it was berthed at the wharf. Do you know anything about the milker? He was asking after Mundy, but how did they know that he was on the milker? Reagan's carriage had been at the milker, and the first mate seemed to think it had collected some cargo. Beyond the obvious, I don't think that had anything to do with the milker. I can't really see that having anything to do with the milker. The first mate had said that a dwarf had been asking about Mundy before I had. That raised my suspicions that there was more going on than Carlotta was telling me. Has there been a dwarf around asking questions? Perhaps the other passengers could tell me something about the stranger. Perhaps I should concentrate on finding out who the stranger was. The first mate hadn't been able to tell me much about the other passengers on the milker, but he did know that there was something distinctly foreign about one of them. Have you seen two strangers recently? Anyone who seemed more foreign than most? I had no reason to assume that had anything to do with the other passengers on the milker. Nobby had told me that there were some mysterious murders in ankh-morpork in the last few days. Do you know anything about the recent murders in ankh-morpork? It wasn't impossible that Al-Kali could have something to do with the recent murders. As stupid as the big dumb troll was, I couldn't see him having anything to do with a string of murders. I refused to believe Ilsa could have anything to do with murder. I didn't know enough about the murders to start jumping to conclusions. The dwarf had tried to threaten me off the Mundy case. I knew right from the start that he knew more than he was telling me. What do you know about a dwarf named Al-Kali? Al-Kali knew about the Mundy case somehow, so he presumably knew Carlotta somehow. Al-Kali and Carlotta were associates, whatever that meant. It didn't seem likely that there was any connection between Al-Kali and Malachite. Dwarves and trolls didn't get on with one another, for a start. The little dwarf probably wasn't as strong as I was. It seemed all too likely to me that Al-Kali had murdered Mundy. It was only a hunch, though, and I couldn't prove it. Perhaps Sapphire had met with Al-Kali. I knew that Al-Kali and Horst were associates, but I didn't know what they meant by that. Al-Kali certainly wanted the golden sword that Mundy was carrying. Had he killed him to get it? The little dwarf couldn't possibly have killed Malachite. If he had, all the stab marks would be around the troll's ankles. Al-Kali could have been involved in that murder, but I had no proof that he was. I couldn't see any real evidence of a connection to Mr. Al-Kali. The big troll had come up to me out of nowhere and asked me to find Therma. He certainly wasn't the brightest troll I'd met. Do you know a troll by the name of Malachite? What was the connection between Malachite and Therma? I found it hard to imagine that the big dumb troll had anything to do with that murder. Apparently Therma's stage name had been Madame Lodestone. Strange that Malachite hadn't mentioned that to me. I'd learnt that Therma was buried in the Salachi vault, but I still had to check it. I probably shouldn't tell Malachite until I was sure. I suppose I should break the news to Malachite. I wasn't looking forward to it. The big dumb troll was too stupid to lie to me, which meant Sapphire must have been lying to me.
But why?
Malachite was certainly strong enough to pull out whatever was in the river.
That had to be worth a shot.
I suppose it was possible that Horst and Malachite knew each other, but I couldn't imagine two trolls with less in common than that pair. It hadn't been easy getting the grapple from Malachite, but it had been worth it. I refused to believe Sapphire had met with Malachite. I found it hard to believe Malachite had anything to do with that. At the start, all I knew about the mysterious Therma was that Malachite wanted me to find her, and that she used to sing at the Octarine Parrot. Do you know anyone named Therma?
Were Madame Lodestone and Therma the same person? I needed to know.
I knew that Madame Lodestone was buried in the mausoleum, which meant if Therma was Madame Lodestone, she was buried there. The way it was going, it seemed as if Sapphire had duped me. I now doubted that Therma and Madame Lodestone were the same person. I'd heard that Therma sang under the stage name of Madame Lodestone. I'd also heard that she was dead. Have you heard of a singer named Madame Lodestone? I wanted to find where Therma was buried in the Salachi family mausoleum, but I needed someone who knew their way around a place like that. You wouldn't happen to know your way around the Salachi family mausoleum by any chance? Count von Uberwald might be just the person to ask about the Salachi mausoleum. I'd learnt that Ilsa was in town and traveling with a man named Two Conkers. Do you know a woman named Ilsa or a man named Two Conkers? They certainly weren't any stronger than me. If there was a connection between Ilsa and Two Conkers and the troll named Horst, it wasn't readily apparent. I doubted that Ilsa or Two Conkers would know anything about the Milka's cargo. All I really knew was that Two Conkers was looking for the jewel. Two Conkers probably knew all kinds of obscure things. I just had to ask him. The trapezohedron might be the jewel Two Conkers was looking for. Two Conkers probably knew all kinds of obscure things. I just had to ask him. Ilsa and Two Conkers had been abroad. It wasn't inconceivable that they might be able to translate the foreign label. Two Conkers might be able to help with that. I don't think Two Conkers could tell me anything more. The Warburg crates belonged to Ilsa and Two Conkers. I had a suspicion that the Warburg crates had something to do with Ilsa. Ilsa's scent was a subtle shade of fuchsia. I guess the fuchsia scent might be Ilsa's. I doubted that the scent belonged to either Ilsa or Two Conkers. There was no connection to Ilsa or Two Conkers as far as I could tell. The butler had told me that the Count's failing health might have something to do with his missing companion. I was anxious to learn more. I really should discuss the matter with the Count. I couldn't see that having anything to do with the Count's missing companion. I'd learnt that the body of Madame Lodestone, a.k.a. Therma, was in the Salachi family mausoleum. Did you know that Madame Lodestone was buried in the Salachi mausoleum? Sooner or later I was going to have to tell Malachite that Therma was dead. Count Henning von Uberwald. Do you know anything about Count von Uberwald? I doubt the Count would have anything to add. I could show the fabric to the Count and see if he recognized it, I suppose. I couldn't see what that had to do with the Count. Either Malachite was wrong, and that rubble was all that was left of Therma, or Sapphire had lied to me. I needed to find out which. I'm trying to find out why a troll named Sapphire would lie to me. Any thoughts? The big dumb troll was too stupid to lie to me, which meant Sapphire must have been lying to me.
But why?
Did Sapphire's secret meeting have something to do with why she lied to me? Did Sapphire's losing streak have something to do with her lying to me? I didn't see what that had to do with Sapphire lying to me. The first mate of the Milka had seen Reagan heading hubwards at high speed in a carriage. I needed to find out where he was going. 3 nights ago, Reagan left the wharf in Ankh, heading hubwards in a carriage. Did you see him? Obviously, Reagan had been on the carriage. The trouble was, this was an investigation, not a join-the-dots puzzle. I knew that there was something in the river, but I hadn't the strength to pull whatever it was to the surface. I didn't think they'd be strong enough to help me pull out whatever it was in the river. Well, the grapple was a start, but I needed someone strong enough to use it. Was it possible that it was Reagan's body in the river? There was only one way to find out. It must be Reagan's carriage in the river. I was going to need someone really strong to pull it up. What did the fabric have to do with what was in the river? That wasn't going to help me get whatever it was out of the river. Someone had tied Mundy up and gouged his eyes out. Whoever they were, I doubted they were anyone I wanted to be friends with. Do you know anything about the murder of a man named Mundy? What had Mundy been trying to write? Who or what was Azil? The murder could have been part of the so-called counterweight killings. Did Horst have something to do with Mundy's death? It seemed likely. Mundy must have hidden the sword somewhere in the Milka's cargo. I didn't know where, though. Was the beast that had slain Malachite involved in Mundy's murder? Were the two murders connected? It seemed all too plausible to me. I was annoyed that Mundy's murderer had used my rope, but there was nothing I could do about it. That didn't seem to be connected to Mundy's murder. I'd learnt that Mundy had been hung upside down by his legs before he was killed. Can you think of any reason that Mundy might have been hung upside down before he was killed? Was Mundy's murder one of the so-called counterweight killings? What was the coin that I'd seen Mundy playing with? Was it important? Or just a trinket he'd taken a shine to? Was the murder part of some gruesome new octogram? I'd read about the death of the title role in The Leering King, one of the 8 great tragedies. The king was hung upside down from a tree, whereupon his eyes were gouged out. It sounded very familiar. I was pretty sure that the olive scent belonged to Mundy. As far as I knew, the scent didn't belong to Mundy. On the wall of Mundy's room, someone had written the word Azil in blood. I didn't know what it meant. Does the word Azil mean anything to you? Perhaps Azil was the name of the bestial attacker. Was Mundy's final message a clue to the whereabouts of the sword? Perhaps if I knew what Azil was, I'd be able to draw more conclusions. Vimes had mentioned the counterweight killings to me back in Mundy's room. Apparently there had been a string of weird ritualistic murders in the city. Do you know anything about the counterweight killings? Was Horst behind the so-called counterweight killings? He had the calm demeanor of a cold-blooded killer, after all. Was there a connection between the killings and the sword? I had no way of knowing. There did seem to be something in common with the counterweight killings and Hwell's 8 great tragedies. I couldn't honestly tell if there was a connection. I'd realized that Mundy had been hung upside down before he was killed, and that the message that seemed to say Azil might actually read 3712V. But I didn't know what it meant. Does 3712V mean anything to you? I think this was Exhibit 3711. I think this urn was the right one. The urn was probably Exhibit 3713. 3712V wasn't much to go on. Mankin told me that Sapphire had met with someone secretly. I didn't know who or when. Frankly, it only just qualified as a clue. You don't happen to know who Sapphire was meeting with when she missed her shift at the Octarine Parrot? There had to be a connection between Sapphire's losing streak and her secret meeting. Perhaps Sapphire had met with Horst. It was certainly a possibility. Did the envelope have anything to do with Sapphire's meeting? I needed to know more about that secret meeting. I'd learned from Saturnalia that Sapphire was suffering from a long-running losing streak. Do you know anything about Sapphire's losing streak? I don't think there was anything more to learn about Sapphire's losing streak. An associate of Alkali's, whatever that means, Horst was a troll who was large on stature and fond of long, rambling sentences that rarely got to the point. I didn't trust him for a second. Do you know a troll by the name of Jasper Horst? Horst wanted the sword pretty badly. It must have been worth a fortune. Horst didn't say he was looking for a jewel, but I reckon he'd take anything of value given half a chance. I couldn't rule out the possibility of Horst being involved in any murder. As far as I knew, the only connection between Horst and Foyd was that they were both trolls. There didn't seem to be any obvious connection with Horst. Horst had spoken of a golden sword, and it was apparent that he thought I had it. I had drawn the conclusion that Mundy had the sword at one point, but it remained to be seen where the sword was now. I didn't want to discuss the golden sword with just anyone. This was clearly something that was worth keeping quiet about. Was Carlotta also looking for the golden sword? It seemed likely. Carlotta was after the golden sword that Mundy had been carrying. There was a good chance that Mundy had hidden the sword somewhere in the Milka's cargo. The barrels had been on the Milka, so the sword might be in one of them. It seemed likely that Mundy would have hidden the sword in Carlotta's crate, unless he didn't intend for Carlotta to get it. The Varberg crates were one of the possible places Mundy could have hidden the sword. There was no obvious reason that Two Conquer's jewel should have anything to do with the sword. I couldn't see a link between that and the sword. There was a chance that the golden sword was somewhere amongst the Milka's cargo. The question was, where was the Milka's cargo now? Do you know anything about the Milka's cargo? If Mundy had taken the coin from out of the Milka's cargo, perhaps the crate it had come from was where the sword was now. The shipping order was my best lead on the Milka's cargo. I couldn't see a connection to the Milka's cargo. The Milka had been carrying some wine barrels that were shipped to the Café Ankh. Do you know anything about the wine barrels the Milka was carrying? Well, the crowbar would open most barrels and crates. It was handy that way. There was no obvious connection to the wine barrels. Somewhere between the Milka and the warehouse, Carlotta's crate had disappeared. According to Carlotta, it wasn't important, but I still wanted to know where it was. Do you know anything about the crate belonging to the von Uberwalds that was on the Milka? Carlotta's crate remained a mystery. The Milka had been carrying crates under the name Varberg, and those crates were now in the Guild of Archaeologists. Do you know anything about the Varberg crates that were on the Milka? The Varberg crates belonged to Ilsa and Two Conquers. I had a suspicion that the Varberg crates had something to do with Ilsa. I didn't know of any connection between the coin and the Varberg crates. If Mundy had stolen the coin from the Varberg crates, perhaps he'd hidden the sword in the same crate. I really didn't know that much about the Varberg crates. I'd traded Reagan's charm bracelet to Warb for the Unseen Security's back passage code. All I had to do was find the rune panel and make an X. I didn't want to discuss the Unseen Security's back passage with anyone. The back passage code really didn't have much to do with anything else. Two Conquers had told me he was looking for an ancient jewel, covered with gold. It was supposed to have Unquam Paratus inscribed on it. The jewel wasn't the kind of thing I wanted to discuss with just anyone. It occurred to me that the jewel Two Conquers was looking for and the radiant trapezohedron could be the same object. It looked as if the indentation in the pommel might be for a jewel. If there was a connection with the jewel, I didn't know what it was. Ilsa wanted me to find a safe haven for Two Conquers. That was her price for getting me into the Guild of Archaeologists. With the Assassin's Guild looking everywhere for Two Conquers, I couldn't trust anyone enough to tell them I was looking for somewhere safe to hide him. I should probably apply my lateral thinking elsewhere, because I reckoned I'd know the right hiding place when I saw it. Clark's Gable had told me that whatever killed Malachite was some kind of beast. He wasn't clear on the details. Do you know anything about some kind of beast stalking the streets? Malachite's bestial killer might well have been involved in other murders. Was the beast something to do with Nylonathotep? Was the bestial attacker marking out a new gruesome octagram? Did the bestial attacker have something to do with the markings on the pendant? Was the lair I'd taken it from the beast's lair? Could the moss have been left at my murder site by the bestial attacker that killed Malachite? That didn't have anything to do with the attacker as far as I knew. I'd found Reagan's body in his carriage in the river under the Magdalen Bridge. Do you know anything about Reagan's murder? I couldn't help but notice that in the iconograph, Reagan was bald. The fabric had led me to Reagan's body. Had Reagan's killer been looking for the key? Did Reagan's death have something to do with the envelope in his locker? It didn't seem likely that anyone would kill Reagan for the charm. In Antilogy and Clephatara, the Queen of Jelly Baby is killed when she is bitten by an asp. An asp that would have left tiny bite marks on her. I was definitely on to something. There was no obvious connection with Reagan's murder. Malachite had been hacked to death with my crowbar. What do you know about the murder of Mount Malachite? It seemed as if the crowbar had killed Malachite. I didn't think that had anything to do with Malachite's murder. There was a certain appeal to the feisty tomb evacuator that I couldn't deny. Do you happen to know Laredo Kronk? I expect Laredo could tell me about all kind of obscure things. She clearly had a lot of talent. I guess Laredo might have known Ilsa and Two Conkers, since they were both members of the same guild. Although Laredo knew Ilsa and Two Conkers, I got the impression they weren't particularly close. Laredo moved in very different circles. Laredo might know Horst. I'd have to ask her. There was no love lost between Laredo and Horst, as far as I could tell. Perhaps I could use that to my advantage. I had no way of knowing if Laredo knew Al-Kali. I suppose I could ask her. It was apparent that Laredo didn't like Al-Kali any more than I did. I could get to like that girl. I wondered if Laredo knew about the back passage. I certainly wasn't going to tell her. Laredo didn't seem like the kind of person who'd kill, except perhaps in self-defense. Laredo probably knew something about the crates, but that didn't mean she was going to tell me. If Laredo had anything to do with that, I didn't know about it. Turning into a wolf. Turning back into a human. One of the patrician's clerks had been murdered, apparently as part of the counterweight killings. Do you know anything about the murder of one of the patrician's clerks? There was something about the murder that suggested Hwell's plays, but I needed to know more about it. I'd need to know more to see if the murder was a case of dead men's pointy boots. I needed to get into the palace if I was going to learn anything about the clerk's murder. The counterweight killings had struck at the unseen university, and the reader of esoteric occultism had been killed. Do you know anything about the murder of the reader of esoteric occultism? I needed to get into Unseen University to ask some questions about the wizard's murder. According to Nobby, a prominent merchant had been killed as part of the counterweight killings. Have you heard about the recent murder of a rich merchant? Even if the merchant wasn't killed as part of internal politics, maybe bluffing that I knew it was would help me learn something. I needed to learn more from the Merchants Guild somehow. The lycanthrope only grew in sewers. I had to find out how to get into the sewers of ankh-morpork. Not many people could claim that. Do you know anything about the sewers beneath ankh-morpork? Presumably I'd find more of the lycanthrope in the sewers. I'd found the pendant in an animal's lair in the sewers. If it had something to do with the sewers, I'd have to get into the sewers to find out. I wanted to find out what the strange symbol in the sanctuary meant. Do you know anything about strange symbols? I wanted to be very careful about who I spoke to about the symbol in the sanctuary. I'd already learnt about the occult in the Libraris Apocrypha. Perhaps I could find out about the symbol in the library as well. Had the cultists drawn the symbol? I really didn't know what the strange symbol meant. The symbol I'd found in the sanctuary was the ancient Elver sign, which apparently was a ward against the old dark gods of the Discworld. What can you tell me about the Elver sign? I didn't want to mention the sign of the eel to just anyone. They'd think I was mad. All this occult business spooked me out. I couldn't see a connection with the Elver sign. I'd learnt about the 8 Great Tragedies, a series of plays written by the dwarfish playwright Hwell, each featuring at least one outlandish murder. Something about the 8 Great Tragedies reminded me of recent events in ankh-morpork. Do you know anything about the 8 Great Tragedies? Cypher had died just like the king's retainer in The King of Ankh, drowned in a vat of wine. Matham had been poisoned. It wasn't exactly the same as the poisoning of Village in The Happy Prince of Copperhaven, but there were definite similarities with one of the other poisonings in the play. The merchant Gaiman was strangled in his guild house. I didn't know by whom, but it certainly sounded similar to the strangling of the merchant in Kensington, one of Hwell's great tragedies, who had been strangled by his wife, who thought he had cheated on her. What did Nylon Athatep have to do with the 8 Great Tragedies? 8 plays, an 8-pointed symbol. There had to be a connection. As a goddess of misunderstandings, Errata probably had a lot to do with the historical events behind Hwell's plays. The 8 plays being shown were definitely the 8 Great Tragedies. I don't think that had anything to do with the plays. Two conkers had told me that the pendant I'd found in the sewers had the same design as the seal of the temple of Anu Anu in the city of Alkali. Have you heard of the temple of Anu Anu at Alkali? I suppose I could ask them about the temple. There was definitely a link between the temple and the pendant. Perhaps investigating one could tell me something about the other. It seemed likely that the list had something to do with Anu Anu. That had nothing to do with the temple. Mooncalf's cultists had mentioned Nylonathotep, but at first I didn't know what it meant. Nylonathotep was important to the cult somehow. It didn't seem wise to mention it to just anyone. An octagram of murders could summon the laddering horror. For some reason, that made me very nervous. The trapezohedron was sacred to the dark sect of Nylonathotep. Foyd might be my link to the dark sect. I knew that Gelid was a member of the dark sect of Nylonathotep. The triple-lobed eye on the amulet was the mark of Nylonathotep. Was the amulet something to do with the dark sect? I suspected the inscription had something to do with Nylonathotep. Did the people on the list have something to do with the laddering horror? What was Nylonathotep, and what did it have to do with the names on the list? I dreaded to think that there might be a connection to Nylonathotep. I needed to know what Nylonathotep was. In the past, an octagram of murders had been involved in summoning Nylonathotep. Octagrams of murders weren't exactly something you could bring up in passing. Whoever had one of those amulets was definitely involved in the octagram of murders. The amulet could have some connection to the octagram. The octagram didn't seem to be connected to that.
Unseen University was looking for someone to make the beds and do the laundry at the new hall. I hear there's a job going at the new hall for a bed maker and laundryman. I guess what I had to do was go up to Unseen University and see if I could use the job to look for clues. When I smelled Carlotta's scent in the von Uberwald mansion, I knew she was a werewolf. I couldn't exactly slip the fact that Carlotta was a werewolf into casual conversation. This was between me and Carlotta. Carlotta claimed she worshipped the goddess Errata. What do you know about the goddess Errata? I doubted Errata had anything to do with that. But I was prepared to be wrong. When I mentioned the murder at Unseen University to Mrs. Foames, she said something about dead men's pointy boots. Does dead men's pointy boots mean anything to you? Was Cypher killed so that someone else could get promoted? No. The patrician staff weren't into that kind of career enhancement. Not internally, anyway. It was possible Matham had been killed so that someone could take his job. What did dead men's pointy boots have to do with that? I'd overheard the patrician and Vimes talking about the murder of the clerk at the palace. Apparently the man's name was Cypher, and he'd been drowned in a vat of wine. There are worse ways to go, I guess. Do you know anything about Cypher's murder? I don't think that was directly connected to Cypher's murder. Between the gatekeeper of the Merchants' Guild and death, I'd learned that the murdered merchant's name was Gaimin, and that he'd been strangled in the guild house. What do you know about Gaimin's murder? I didn't see any direct connection to Gaimin's death. One of the Bledlows up at Unseen University had told me that the reader in esoteric occultism's name was Matham, and he'd been poisoned in his room in the Widdershins wing. Can you tell me anything about Matham's murder? If there was a direct connection with Matham's murder, I couldn't see it. I'd overheard something interesting at the window of the Temple of Small Gods. Something about a meeting of the True Believers. Until I knew what this meeting was, I had to be careful who I discussed it with. If I could get the perfume onto Mooncalf, I could track him across the city. Were the names on the lists the True Believers that Mooncalf had mentioned? That didn't have anything to do with the meeting as far as I knew. Does Quod Nessi and Eos Interficit mean anything to you? I needed to know more about the inscription. I'd learned about the trapezohedron in the Libraris Apocrypha. I wasn't really sure what a trapezohedron was. Either a geometric shape or some kind of dinosaur, I assume. Either way, it was a source of great power and sacred to the dark sect of Nylonathotep. Given the trapezohedron's history, it wasn't something I wanted to discuss with just anyone. The trapezohedron might be the jewel Two Conkers was looking for. Two Conkers probably knew all kinds of obscure things. I just had to ask him. Perhaps the trapezohedron fitted into the indentation in the pommel of the sword. I couldn't be sure until I found it. I didn't think that had anything to do with the trapezohedron.
I decided to track down Foyd. I figured it wouldn't be hard to get information out of him. Do you know where I can find a troll called Foyd? I figured that Foyd could tell me about the amulet. Foyd had told me about Gelid. His name was on the list, all right. I just needed to find Foyd and ask him a few questions. According to Foyd, Gelid was my route to Satrap, the head of the dark sect. I'm trying to find a man named Gelid. Can you help? Did Gelid have an amulet like Kondo's? Well, the crowbar would open most barrels and crates. It was handy that way. It seemed as if the crowbar had killed Malachite. Without knowing what the label said, there was no way of knowing if it would help lead me to Mundy. Beyond the obvious, I don't think that had anything to do with the Milka. Ilsa and two Conkers had been abroad. It wasn't inconceivable that they might be able to translate the foreign label. It seemed possible that the scrap of cardboard had something to do with Mundy. Beyond the obvious, I don't think that had anything to do with the Milka. I was guessing that Mundy had dropped the torn matchbook in the warehouse. If the matchbook belonged to Mundy, and it seemed likely, then presumably the address had something to do with Mundy. I thought I could work out what had happened. Someone must have told Mundy the address which he wrote on the matchbook. Somehow, a scrap of it must have been torn off on the Milka, and he must have dropped the rest in the warehouse when he broke in. I had a suspicion if I didn't find Mundy at the address on the matchbook, I'd find something even more interesting. Presuming that Carlotta had written the invitation, the writing on it was her handwriting. It hadn't been easy getting the grapple from Malachite, but it had been worth it. Well, the grapple was a start, but I needed someone strong enough to use it. I was annoyed that Mundy's murderer had used my rope, but there was nothing I could do about it. It hadn't been easy getting the grapple from Malachite, but it had been worth it. I was annoyed that Mundy's murderer had used my rope, but there was nothing I could do about it. Well, the grapple was a start, but I needed someone strong enough to use it. I doubt the Count would have anything to add. Obviously, Reagan had been on the carriage. The trouble was, this was an investigation, not a join-the-dots puzzle. Was it possible that it was Reagan's body in the river? There was only one way to find out. I couldn't help but notice that in the iconograph, Reagan was bald. I could show the fabric to the Count and see if he recognized it, I suppose. The fabric had led me to Reagan's body. Two Conkers probably knew all kinds of obscure things. I just had to ask him. What was the coin that I'd seen Mundy playing with? Was it important? Or just a trinket he'd taken a shine to? If Mundy had taken the coin from out of the Milka's cargo, perhaps the crate it had come from was where the sword was now. Carlotta had given me the shipping order, but I wasn't sure I believed everything she told me about it. The shipping order was my best lead on the Milka's cargo. Had Reagan's killer been looking for the key? Was it possible the envelope had something to do with Carlotta? If it did, then why was it empty? Did the envelope have anything to do with Sapphire's meeting? Did Reagan's death have something to do with the envelope in his locker? Two Conkers probably knew all kinds of obscure things. I just had to ask him. It didn't seem likely that anyone would kill Reagan for the charm. Presumably I'd find more of the lycanthrope in the sewers. Could the moss have been left at my murder site by the bestial attacker that killed Malachite? If I could get the perfume onto Mooncalf, I could track him across the city. Even though I'd found the pendant in the sewers, something about it made me think of Carlotta. Maybe it was just a hunch. Two Conkers probably knew all kinds of obscure things. I just had to ask him. Did the bestial attacker have something to do with the markings on the pendant? Was the lair I'd taken it from the beast's lair? There was definitely a link between the temple and the pendant. Perhaps investigating one could tell me something about the other. I'd found the pendant in an animal's lair in the sewers. It seemed likely that the list had something to do with Anu. Were the names on the lists the true believers that Mooncalf had mentioned? Had the cultists drawn the symbol? His name was on the list, all right. The 8 plays being shown were definitely the 8 great tragedies. 8 plays. An 8-pointed symbol. There had to be a connection. There did seem to be something in common with the counterweight killings and Hwell's 8 great tragedies. It looked as if the indentation in the pommel might be for a jewel. Perhaps the trapezohedron fitted into the indentation in the pommel of the sword. I couldn't be sure until I found it. 2 conkers might be able to help with that. Horst wanted the sword pretty badly. It must have been worth a fortune. I don't think 2 conkers could tell me anything more. 2 conkers probably knew all kinds of obscure things. I just had to ask him. I figured that Foyd could tell me about the amulet. Did Gelid have an amulet like Kondo's? 2 conkers probably knew all kinds of obscure things. I just had to ask him. 2 conkers might be able to help with that. The trapezohedron was sacred to the dark sect of Nylonathotep. My purse might not have been my most valued possession, but I sure felt happier when it was full than when it was empty. There wasn't much in my purse, just enough for emergencies. My purse was even lighter after bribing Whirl. I suppressed the urge to ask for money. I was broke, sure, but I wasn't that desperate. I doubt my purse had anything to do with what was going on. I think I can recognize the scent of money, what little I have. I suppose I could hide the tooth in my purse, but there didn't seem much point. It may be a coin, but putting it in my purse wasn't going to achieve anything. I wasn't about to put that in my purse. Although the crowbar was a lot heavier than a set of skeleton keys, it was more versatile. I guess if lockpicks were invented for thieves, the crowbar was invented for the private investigator. Tempting as it was, I decided not to start attacking people with the crowbar. The crowbar had nothing to do with that. The dark red scent of the iron crowbar was quite distinct, and not the same as that scent. That wasn't going to do much to the crowbar. I'd pulled the label out of the flotsam in the bilge water of the Milka. Unfortunately, I couldn't read it. One of the figures looked like a number, but I couldn't be sure. Can you read this? I needed someone who could read the label. The scrap of cardboard I'd found in one of the bunks on the Milka had a number on it, either a 6 or a 9. I didn't think the scrap had been torn off intentionally, but that was all I could tell from examining it. Does this mean anything to you? The torn matchbook fitted precisely to the scrap of cardboard I'd found on the Milka. That had nothing to do with the scrap of cardboard. The torn matchbook had been found in the Pier 5 warehouse. There was something written on the back of the matchbook, but a corner of the matchbook had become ripped off somehow. I could make out the words Whalebone Lane, but it was clear that something was missing. On closer examination, I was pretty sure the missing piece had become torn off accidentally. The scrap of cardboard I'd found on the Milka matched the torn matchbook exactly. What do you make of this? That had nothing to do with the torn matchbook. The reconstructed matchbook clearly read 9 Whalebone Lane. I suppose I could tear it up again, but I was pretty pleased with the jigsaw as it was. Any thoughts on this matchbook, or what's written on it? That had nothing to do with the matchbook. It certainly looked like a woman's handwriting. It was a pretty safe bet it was Carlotta's. I don't know why I thought I needed to show off the invitation card from Carlotta, and on reflection it seemed like a fairly pointless thing to do. That didn't have anything to do with the invitation. I'd found the plaster-encrusted bandages on the floor of Rodin's workshop. Apart from the fact that they'd been soaked in plaster and left to dry, there didn't seem to be anything unusual about them. Examining the indents left in the dried plaster, it looked as if there had been a face under the bandages. Do these bandages mean anything to you? I don't think that has anything to do with the bandages. It hadn't been easy getting the grappling iron from Malachite. Of course, even getting a meaningful sentence from Malachite was a challenge. I examined the grapple closely. It looked as if it was welded out of metal strips. I really didn't want to talk to anyone about the grappling iron. If the carriage was in the river, could I use the grapple to pull it up? What did the grapple have to do with the carriage? The grapple was basically for climbing things. Since Monday's killer had ruined my rope, the grapple wasn't much use. I suppose I could have asked for some rope, but I still have some pride. Not much, but it was all I had. If the carriage was in the river, could I use the grapple to pull it up? What did the grapple have to do with the carriage? What I needed was some rope. Then it'd be useful again. A beautiful glittering diamond. I tried not to think that I had pulled it out of a dead troll's corpse. More importantly, I tried not to think about the fact that I stole it from the Salaci family mausoleum. The diamond tooth was very sharp. I wasn't about to flash the stolen tooth around. Someone might tell Lord Salaci, and the next thing I knew I'd have a blade in my back and a receipt from the Assassin's Guild on my bedside table. The only crime the diamond tooth had been involved in was my theft of it from the mausoleum. The diamond tooth was very sharp, and I didn't want to play around with it. Reagan was Count von Uberwald's driver and confidant. He'd paid me to find him, or to find out what had happened to him, and had given me this picture of him to help. I looked closely at the iconograph and memorized the bold dwarf's features. I couldn't help but notice that Reagan was bald. Do you recognize the dwarf in this iconograph? Do you know anything about the murder of the dwarf in this iconograph? I was pretty sure it was Reagan's key. After all, it was glued to his head. The envelope had presumably belonged to Reagan, but it wasn't clear why it was empty. What had Reagan kept in it? I guess Reagan thought the charm brought him good luck. It didn't bring him much luck on the Magdalen Bridge. Apart from letting me know what Reagan looked like, the iconograph was pretty useless. I'd found some fabric caught on the railings of the Magdalen Bridge. It was distinctive enough that I hoped someone would recognize it. The fabric had obviously been torn from something quite high off the ground. Have you seen this fabric anywhere before? The fabric was from Reagan's carriage. Could the fabric be from Reagan's carriage? It seemed possible. Perhaps I could get the Count to identify it. It must be Reagan's carriage in the river. I was going to need someone really strong to pull it up. What did the fabric have to do with what was in the river? I didn't see what the fabric had to do with that. The only time I saw Mundy, he was playing with this coin. A metallic flat disc with a square hole in the center. The coin had markings on one side that I couldn't read. It wasn't from any nation I'd ever heard of. Examining the coin closely, I noticed that the markings had been engraved on. That seemed an unusual thing to do on a coin. Unfortunately, the inscription was illegible. I had a feeling that Mundy's coin was important, and I wasn't about to show it to just anyone. There didn't seem to be a connection between the coin and 3712V. Ilsa had said the coin looked like 2305, one of the relics in their collection. Perhaps 3712 referred to a different relic. I didn't know of any connection between the coin and the Varberg crates. If Mundy had stolen the coin from the Varberg crates, perhaps he'd hidden the sword in the same crate. The coin didn't seem to have anything in common with the pendant. The amulet and the coin had nothing in common. The inscription on the coin was similar to some of the symbols on the urn. The coin didn't seem to have much to do with that. Carlotta had given me the shipping order for the crate she had on the Milka. The shipping order was in the name of von Uberwald, and was for a crate that should have been on the Milka. Does this shipping order mean anything to you? The shipping order had nothing to do with that. Reagan had a small key under his toupee. It was basically glued onto his head, so I guess it was important to him. The number 23 was engraved on it. It was only a small key, so I guess it was only for a small door. I didn't want to discuss Reagan's key with just anyone. The envelope had come from Reagan's safety deposit box, and I had a feeling that it was important somehow. The thing was, it seemed to be empty. When I opened Reagan's envelope, I don't know what I was expecting. What I wasn't expecting was to find that the envelope was empty. There wasn't even anything written on the inside. I had a feeling that the envelope wasn't something I should discuss with everyone I met. There was no obvious connection to Reagan's envelope. I don't know why Reagan kept a charm bracelet in his safety deposit box, but I guess he wanted to keep it safe. There was a strangely mystical feeling about the charm bracelet, and I wasn't sure I liked it. Does this charm bracelet mean anything to you? I wasn't sure what the charm had to do with anything. The poker was like any other in the city, except that it wasn't red hot, and it had probably never been inserted up someone's bottom. There wasn't much to examine on the poker. It's just a poker. An urn, dug up in Sorta. I'd never seen anything more tedious in all my life. There was something big rattling around in the urn, but I couldn't see what it was. I noticed there were some illegible markings on the urn. I think this was Exhibit 3711. I think this urn was the right one. The urn was probably Exhibit 3713. They were both similar urns, just different shapes. It was just an urn. Some moss. Found where I was murdered. I was sure the lycanthrope was moving. When I looked closely at it, I was convinced it was moving. I doubted the moss had anything to do with that. Obviously a very exclusive Troll perfume. The perfume smelled foul to me. The perfume had nothing to do with that. I'd found the pendant in the sewers. How it got there was anyone's guess. The pendant was ornately designed, and it looked as if it might be hollow, but there was no obvious clasp mechanism. I couldn't see what that had to do with the pendant. I'd found a list of 8 names in the pendant. The name that stood out was Therma's. I'd keep the list of names to myself until I knew more about it. I was strangely relieved not to find Carlotta's name on the list, even though I wasn't sure what the list of names represented. I had a feeling I wasn't going to like finding out. I knew now that Carlotta was Therma. I should have guessed a long time ago. Did the people in the list have something to do with the laddering horror? What was Nylonathotep? And what did it have to do with the names on the list? I didn't see a link to the list of names. I'd picked up the theater flyer from the Disc Theater. It told me about the plays in the Disc's current season. The 8 plays in sequence were The Happy Prince of Copperhaven, Antilogy and Cleopatra, Kensington, The King of Ankh, The Leering King, The Tyrant, Truculus and Cressylic, and Titus Diplodocus. The flyer didn't tell me anything about them, though. Do you know anything about the plays at the Disc Theater? I couldn't see a connection to the flyer. The golden sword had already caused me a lot of trouble. I had a feeling it was going to cause a lot more before long. Examining the sword, I noticed an indentation in the pommel. It looked as if something was supposed to fit there. I wasn't going to show a priceless artifact like the sword to anyone without a good reason. The trapezohedron fitted into the pommel perfectly, but I wanted to wait until the right moment to do it. Everything that had been going on revolved around this sword. The golden sword was fine just the way it was. 2 conkers had given me a star map that was supposed to lead to the jewel he was looking for. I didn't know what to make of the map. I was never good at astrology. The star map wasn't something I could talk to just anyone about. I could probably use the astrolabe to navigate with the map, but I'd need to know where I was supposed to be looking first. There didn't seem to be a connection with the star map. Kondo's amulet has a symbol on it that looked like an eye, but an eye with 3 protruding lobes. I had no idea what the symbol on the amulet meant. The triple-lobed eye symbol was the sign of Nylonathotep. The amulet was something to do with a very secretive and dangerous cult. I didn't want to show it to people without a good reason. The triple-lobed eye on the amulet was the mark of Nylonathotep. Was the amulet something to do with the dark sect? Whoever had one of those amulets was definitely involved in the octagram of murders. The amulet could have some connection to the octagram. I couldn't see a connection to the amulet. I'd managed to get a search warrant from Nobby. It was a parchment from the oblong office signed by the patrician and saying how disappointed he would be if the aforementioned establishment were to deny access to the undersigned. It was made out in my name for Unseen University, and I had every intent of using it. The warrant seemed genuine enough. I had no reason to discuss the warrant with anyone but Mrs. Foames. I needed to show the warrant to Mrs. Foames. The astrolabe was a carefully constructed tool for navigating the heavens. I suppose it could be useful if I got lost in the city and wanted to work out which way was hubwards. I think I could see how the astrolabe worked. The astrolabe wasn't an easy thing to slip into casual conversation. For an artifact of near unlimited power, the trapezohedron was surprisingly unimpressive. I peered deeply into the trapezohedron, and I could see an image of Horst with the golden sword. It looked like he was at the Magdalen Bridge. All I could see in the jewel were reflections of myself. Everyone and his wife was looking for the radiant trapezohedron. I wasn't about to start flashing it around casually. I didn't know of any connection between that and the trapezohedron. Magenta cloud with flashing dots. The magenta scent permeated the niche, stronger even than the smell of the ankh. There weren't many times in life you got to say that. It was definitely the scent from the cemetery. I still didn't know what the coruscating static meant, though. Fuchsia cloud. The scent of a woman around my grave. Trail of magenta with glowing dots. Something had passed through the cemetery and left a very strange trail. Unpleasant aqua fog. The smell of Gaspode the Wonder Dog. Not unlike that of a privy carpet. Light green stench. Ah, the famous stench of the river Ankh, so beloved by the citizens of ankh-morpork. Dark blue puddle. Around where Mundy's body had lain was a dark blue scent. Hint of apple. There was a hint of an apple-colored scent in the air. The apple scent here was the same as in Sapphire's dressing room. I guess it belonged to Mankin, the half-elf barman. Strong hint of navy blue. There was a bold scent of navy blue in the air. Definitely Vime's commanding odor. By a process of elimination, I worked out that the navy blue scent belonged to Commander Vimes. I couldn't be sure who the navy blue scent belonged to. Strong hint with a nudge in the side of teal. The teal scent strongly resembled tobacco and guilt. I guess Nobby's scent had lingered on from when he was here several days ago. I had a feeling his scent was as good a lingerer as Nobby was. The tobacco scent from the rooftops was here, too. It could only be Nobby. Lingering threat of magenta. There was definitely the remains of a magenta scent in Mundy's room. The scent was too dispersed for me to remember it well. Unless Mankin, Nobby, or Vimes were the killer. I guess my murderer had also killed Mundy. My killer had been here, but were they responsible for Mundy's murder? Red mist. The predominant smell in the cellar was of red wine, considerably more pleasant than the smell of the river, at least. The red wine here had exactly the same scent as the barrels outside the patrician's palace. Traces of blue. There was some faint traces of a light blue scent in the corner of the cellar. The scent was very weak, and I didn't think I would be able to remember it very well. Hint of purple. There was a lingering smell of purple in the corner. It was too scattered for me to remember it. Faint purple scent. There was a very faint trace of purple leading towards Madame Lodestone's tomb. The scent was too faint to remember. Lingering dark brown scent. I could just about detect a dark brown scent in the chamber. The scent would need to be stronger if I was going to remember it. Trail of navy scent. The only noticeable scent in the hallway was someone's trail which led to the double doors. What was Commander Vimes doing in the palace? I had no idea who the trail belonged to. Red mist. The scent of red wine wasn't as strong as in the cellar, but it was still noticeable. It was the same red wine, of course. Traces of magenta. My killer had definitely been here. The magenta scent was too faint for me to remember it well. It was the same scent as my killer's. Light green stench. On a good day, the Pleasance was apparently a nice place for a walk. Presumably today was not a good day. Overwhelming light green fog. I knew that Gelid was a member of the dark sect of Nylonethotep. The invitation read as follows.
Leave that alone. Don't touch that. Keep your grubby little hands away from that. You mustn't touch that. Honestly, you're like a little child. Leave it alone.
The fire had gone out. I looked around in the fireplace. There seemed to be some kind of switch up in the chimney. Laredo could light the fire like anyone else, I guess. The extinguished fire had nothing to do with Ilsa and two Conkers. Bookcase. Hinged book. Switch. I wondered if I was ever going to find out the origin of his name. But then I read the line. The city of Al-Khali is also known for its wind, blowing from the vastness of the deserts and continents nearer the rim. A gentle yet persistent breeze. It carries aromatic messages from the heart of the continent, compounded of the chill of the deserts, the stink of lions, the compost of jungles, and the flatulence of wildebeest. Well, it was a working theory, at least. It was only a small bookcase, but it might have something interesting on its shelves. It was only a small bookcase. I really needed a decent-sized library. I browsed aimlessly through the bookcase, and I noticed that one of the books was connected to the bookcase by a hinge. I wasn't an expert, but I was pretty sure the hinged book was a switch of some kind. The switch just looked like a small stone tile. The switch was too far out of reach for me to press it. I pressed the switch with the poker. I heard a faint click, but nothing happened. I needed something with a point. I needed something longer. If I was going to press the switch, I'd need something rigid. I was trying very hard not to get sidetracked. There was no telling what treasure was on the other side of the fireplace. I was supposed to use the back passage on a panel with runes. I didn't think this was it. She probably knew what to do with the switch, but she wasn't here anymore. I couldn't press the switch with that. The fire went out. The fire sparked back into life. Spooky. It was a lot easier than lighting it by hand. It was fairly obvious what to do with a hinged book. It was hard to imagine what a book would have to say about that. Azil was mentioned in the Big Book of Archaeology. Apparently he was an insane Askari from the Great Neph, renowned for burying people upside down. I couldn't find any reference to 3712V. The charm appeared in wooden artifacts, a spotter's guide, as Gluckting, a type of magical amulet from Uberwald, carved out of serendipitous redwood. I had a feeling it would be worth investigating further. This was really starting to annoy me. I couldn't see what I was doing wrong. The switch had to do something. Unless there was another switch somewhere that I had to press first. Cemetery. The cemetery at the Temple of Small Gods. People in the cemetery were undoubtedly murdered, but I think I was straying off the point. Murder site. The site of my unfortunate demise. I really wanted to believe that my death wasn't part of some nefarious scheme. But who was I kidding? I didn't need a warrant to search there. I followed my murderer's trail back to the Temple of Small Gods. I followed the magenta scent with a certain sense of grim inevitability. I already knew where it would lead. Down by the river, the smell of the ankh was... I don't know. It was pretty bad anyway. I didn't want to push my luck. Finding a book on swords wasn't as difficult as I thought. I even found a tome on gold blades. 1001 Golden Swords, the complete story of gold swords throughout history. Unfortunately, it wasn't very helpful. I had a look through the Necrotelecomnicon discussed for students to see if I could find any more useful information. It wasn't long before I found the phrase that had been inscribed on the wall of the sepulchral temple, Quod nescient eos interficit. It turned out to be the motto of an ancient cult, the dark sect of Nylonathotep, whose emblem was the triple-lobed eye. The tome told me a little of the history of the cult. It seems the mad cultists of the laddering horror had conspired to destroy all creation, but their attempt failed, obviously, and they were believed to have faded into obscurity. I had a suspicion that's exactly what the cult wanted people to think. According to the book, the cult had a sacred artifact, a source of great power known as the Radiant Trapezohedron, which could destroy Nylonathotep or give him dominion over all things, if it fell into his tentacles. There was no description of it, although the author seemed to think it was something small. There was something about a cult plotting to destroy all creation that disturbed me. I had a feeling you couldn't reason with people like that. In almost all the other plays, the lead met a horrible end. The Happy Prince of Copperhaven, who was poisoned at the end, and Trilogy and Cleopatra, who were stabbed and poisoned by an asp, respectively. Kensington, who was strangled by his wife. The leering king, who had his eyes gouged out. The tyrant, who was stabbed repeatedly in the back. And Truculus and Cressylic, He gets dragged through the streets of Sort until dead, and she is one of the tiny handful of protagonists to actually survive one of Hwell's action-packed blockbuster murder fests. If they held a Protagonists of Hwell's Tragedies annual reunion, the only other person there would be the lead role in The King of Ankh. I worked out a translation for the phrase I'd seen on the wall of the sepulchral temple. What they don't know will kill them. Unfortunately, without something to cross-reference with it, I couldn't find out anything else about it. 1001 Golden Swords, the complete story of gold swords throughout history, had an entry on the Sortees Falchion. Their illustration was different somehow. I noticed that there was some kind of gold stud in the pommel where the real sword had an indentation. Perhaps there was something missing from the sword, and perhaps that was why Anu had failed to defeat Nylonathotep. On it was the message, Crow Otsmes Sit. Leonard moved in mysterious ways. The design sketch that it was attached to seemed to be the design of the so-called handy note-scribbling piece of paper with glue that comes unstuck when you want, which used a type of glue made from boiled slugs. It was becoming remarkably apparent to me that whilst Leonard was probably the greatest technological genius of all time, he was a bit of a detritus when it came to thinking up names. I decided to leave them to their work. I doubted they even noticed I was gone. I was getting very tired of thinking of amusing things to say to myself.
Indeed you should.
The dorm was full of the jangling scents of the students, but the most surprising thing was the octarine board. As a wolf, I smelt the words on the board. The chalk marks showed up as sparkling traces against the odorless board. It seemed to be a list of subjects the young apprentices were studying. Occult perils of lace-making, basic myth and monsters, principles of thaumic imponderability, and temples of the great Nev. The moon over Dagon Street lit the rundown alley. It didn't look like anyone was around. It was as abandoned as the octarine parrot on open stage night. There was no denying it. Here was the grisly evidence of another murder. I didn't want to think about it anymore. I needed a little more to go on than just a bone.
I'd already found the Sortees Falchion, a rare, invaluable artifact of unknown power, in the rubble. Hoping for anything else was a little over-optimistic. Why did I keep doing this to myself? I'm in an eerie, occult temple. The roof is collapsing, and yet for some reason I'm playing about with a stupid inscription.
I wouldn't know nothing about that.
I decided I'd better come back later, when Mooncalf was slightly less psychotic.
Why don't you find out what it means, and then maybe I'll tell you something, huh?
I found out what this is. It's the mark of the entity your cult summoned. Now I want to know what it means to you.
Perhaps I should have a look anyway. Line it up with the celestial parsnip. On the other hand, I'd kick myself if I ignored it. Went off, tried about 100 other different things, only to find out that I could have saved myself a hell of a lot of bother by looking at the damn thing in the first place. I may regret this, but show me Gahuli, the vase of tulips.
I was having a sudden bout of precognition. For some reason, I knew I had to use the astrolabe here, but I didn't know why. It would really help if I knew which part of the sky I should be paying attention to. Sure, I could sit here chatting to Ilsa, but I already knew what would happen. We'd talk. I'd hear romantic music playing. Maybe I'd experience a flashback to bygone days. Frankly, my time would be better spent trying to save the city. If the carriage was in the river, could I use the grapple to pull it up? What did the grapple have to do with the carriage? That probably wouldn't help me to find out where the carriage went. I doubted they could help me navigate round the mausoleum. When I burst in on Sapphire, she was playing with a huge pile of money. Now, I'm not a suspicious person. Well, that's not true, is it? I'm suspicious as hell. And a troll with a lot of money was as suspect as cut-me-own-throat Dibbler's sausage in a bun. There had to be a connection between Sapphire's sudden windfall and her lying to me. Despite what Sapphire said, she certainly didn't win that money at Saturnalia. Carlotta might just be rich enough to get that much money. But why would she give it to a deadbeat troll like Sapphire? Why would he give Sapphire money? It was possible Horst and Alkali had bribed Sapphire, but why? Did Reagan's envelope have anything to do with Sapphire's money? If there was a connection to Sapphire's money, I couldn't see it. You don't happen to know how a troll singer might end up with a lot of money by any chance. Malachite didn't have $1 to his name. The dumb troll probably couldn't even spell dollar. I was now pretty convinced that whoever Sapphire met with had given her a big pile of cash. I had to find out who it was. Frankly, I was hoping they'd give me a big pile of cash, too. Because if I didn't pay my bar tab soon, they were going to break both my arms, and I hate drinking with a straw. The only way I could picture Laredo and Sapphire meeting was if Sapphire was rolling down a tunnel and Laredo was running away from her. Maybe in the sequel. An interesting, if desperate idea. Why would Laredo give money to Sapphire? Perhaps the money was payment for a murder. Unlicensed assassin by day, club singer by night. Even I didn't believe it. Fascinating though my life was, not everyone wanted to hear every minute detail of my social life. Sapphire had done it. I had a meeting with the mysterious Therma. Actually, make that the elusive Therma. The mysterious Therma makes it sound like she's a stage conjurer or a lost continent. I'm off on an expedition to the mysterious Therma, someone might say. I should probably shut up now before someone realizes that I don't know what I'm talking about. The only person who might care about my meeting with Therma was Malachite. For some reason I was musing about informing Malachite of my meeting with Therma, instead of just going to Rodan's workshop and telling the big dumb troll. Perhaps Therma could tell me what this envelope business was all about. Okay, I admit it. I was desperate for some explanations. I'd been pounding the streets for days, getting nowhere. Wasn't it about time the bad guys captured me and told me all their nefarious plots? I'd definitely been watching too many clickies recently. Maybe Therma could help me with that. I'd have to wait until we finally met. Aside from the obvious, there was no connection between the tooth and my meeting with Therma. The key to the wine cellar. Samael had given me the key to the wine cellar. All I had to do was use it. I was half hoping to find Ilsa hiding in the wine cellar. Well, we all have our fantasies. I had learned to identify what a key looked like. Truly, genius was just a short step away. The key opened the wine cellar. That was the end of the matter. It was a waste of time discussing the key with Samael. He was the one who gave it to me. Look, I knew what would happen if I left with the key. I'd drag it halfway across town, using it on 100 different locks that it wouldn't fit, and trying to talk to every meaningless nobody I ran into on the way. It would be simpler for everyone concerned if I just unlocked the damn cellar door. I was acting really stupid recently. I struggled to understand why I couldn't just leave the Café Ankh, and why I would want to without unlocking the wine cellar. It was as if I was being controlled by some cosmic moron who kept making me do really stupid things just so he could laugh at me. I had better unlock the cellar first. Besides, I liked Samael, and I drew the line at breaking into the cafe's wine cellar without his permission. Reagan's key didn't open the wine cellar. It wasn't even the right kind of key.
That's nothing to do with me.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to try that again. I was pretty sure I'd learned all I was going to learn from using my wolf senses here. I hardly needed to unlock that. What did that have to do with Reagan's key? Fast little fellow, he disappeared the moment I started moving. No matter what I did, that rat was too quick for me. I was beginning to lose patience with the little rodent. I was really starting to hate that rat. This was getting very annoying. By then, I hated it so much I'd started calling it Bill. I didn't have time to chat. Rat.
I might be able to produce a flapping wing flying device that could be driven forward by a human operating the pedals with his feet.
You were traveling with a man, right?
Actually, 2 Conkers is from the counterweight continent. I learnt it from him.
I would be hard-pressed to find a way to use that on the streets. I damaged the skylight slightly when I forced it open with the crowbar. Gee, how would I sleep at night?
Okay, then we can rule out the fornix sanguis ceruleus.
I rather think that is my business and not yours.
It seemed like I touched a nerve. What was it that the Count wasn't telling me? Oh, I'm so scared. He told me that he hadn't, but I was convinced he was lying. The matchbook had to belong to Mundy, and I was sure he was hiding here. Do you know what happened to Reagan after that? That would give you a pretty strong motive for killing Reagan.
My, you are a suspicious one, aren't you?
It's a hobby. Who's Reagan?
Tut, tut. We have been lax in our investigating.
Just tell me who he is, Carlotta.
Henning's friend, if that's a meaningful word when it comes to the old relic. You should talk to him about Reagan, not me.
What can you tell me about the cargo you just brought in?
It was heavy, and it was all packed into crates.
That's not very helpful. It's what was in the crates I'm interested in.
If they wanted us to know what was in the crates, they would tell us.
But you could be shipping anything. Aren't you just a little curious?
A little being curious makes for a lot of being dead.
Don't you ever peek?
Even if I did, I wouldn't tell anyone about it.
Does this mean anything to you?
It's a shipping order.
I'd work that out, thanks.
There you go. Didn't even need my help.
Can you think of any reason why someone would murder Mundy?
I didn't think you needed a reason to kill people in ankh-morpork.
Everything has a reason.
I've never been one for teleology.
Don't start. I can do without the philosophy.
Suit yourself.
Do you know a troll named Sapphire?
I can't say I do.
I should put that on the bottle. KC2, stronger than the ankh on a summer day. I was beginning to realize that Captain Jenkins only had 2 questions to ask his passengers. Where are you going? And how much money have you got? It's his job. Once they've been paid, the target is as good as dead. They never renege on a contract. They throw great soirees as well, and if they invite you, they won't take no for an answer.
This jewel be having inscription. Unquam paratas.
You could have that on a sign outside. Come to the Octarine Parrot, the most wretched hive of scum and villainy this side of the ankh. I've already told you, I don't think the killer would have cut him down. Which means if you cut him down, you're in the clear.
I'd tell you about myself in 4 words. Big ideas, small results.
I knew Nobby, though. The best I could hope for would be he'd pass a memo on to someone else, and I wasn't hopeful for even that. Nobby had a simple attitude to police work. If a job's worth doing, it's worth finding someone else to do it for you.
Present, Corporal Nobbs and Sergeant Detritus.
Detritus! Only brutality if...
There's an inscription.
For it is written in the book of Kelpie, he who has not the spirit of Anu Anu in his heart shall have his heart eaten by the Divine One on the day of judgment.
There's 2 things you've got to learn about being a werewolf. The nose and the change. He intimidated others with his dream. That all dogs were wolves at heart and needed only to band together to overthrow humanity, the master race, and reclaim their ancient heritage.
And I only have one thing to say about them. I'll place good money that the patrician's next.
It's like I said, everything in the guild is stolen. It seems only fitting that someone else should get to steal it back, assuming they can overcome the traps, of course.
Well, like, is it raining? Or doesn't that cloud look like a really big cloud?
You know, come to ankh-morpork, site of the infamous counterweight killings. I made my way into the observatory, and inside was a wizard whose voice I recognized. Satrap. I wasn't sure what he was doing, but it couldn't be good. Translation, yes. Why do you talk like that?
I would say, doomsday is near, die all, die merrily.
The question was, how? I knew the streets, but high society family trees were like women, complex and incomprehensible. Mundy must have had the sword at one point, but I didn't think it was in his room when he was killed, so where was it? The question was, where was the sword now? Malachite. Stabbed in the back repeatedly with a crowbar. The lead in the Tyrant. Stabbed in the back repeatedly. Not with a crowbar, but it was close enough. There was an inscription on the crowbar. Property of the Patrician's Palace. The label says, KC2, Potassium Carbide Perfume. The perfume for a troll or a woman. The names on the list were Mooncalf, Satrap, Therma, Coom, Gelid, Warb, Foyd, and Kondo. Some I recognized. Some were strangers to me. The question was, what did they have in common? Why did someone have a list of their names, and how did they get it into the pendant? Like most rooms, Mundy's room featured a very useful design feature. A door, allowing people to get in and out without demolishing a section of wall. You could say this about Nobby. Deep down, he was a good man. Well, deep down, he was probably a man. Good might be stretching it a bit. The question was, why?
I suppose I could throw a coin in the pool if it wasn't for one thing. I liked my money just where it was.
The guild coat of arms was clearly displayed, along with the guild motto, Serpentis Odi. One of the vaults grabbed my attention more than the others, Vault 51. Whereas most of the vaults were open, this one was sealed behind a large oak door, with the words Nil Introitus written on it. I once knew a man who had that tattooed on his buttocks. Up on the wall of Vault 51 was a sign reading, Unseen Securities, Magical Alarums, Wards, and Hexes. I guess a place like this needed the best security around. The Merchant Guild's coat of arms, featuring their famous cock and bull design, was accompanied by the guild's motto, Vilis ad bis prete. I wasn't good at the old language, but I think it translated to cheap at twice the price. One name leapt out at me. Therma. I decided to keep the list to myself.
Not that it mattered now. He was dead.
The Milka's cargo had been unloaded into the Pier 5 warehouse. The Pier 5 warehouse. Pier 5. There were people talking behind the door.
Oh, it's a terrible state. I don't know how he puts up with it. Oh, I know, dear, I know. Just because the prisoners don't mean they shouldn't keep their rooms clean. It's shocking. Absolutely shocking. And those ones that are chained up, they're the worst. They think 'cause they get special treatment they don't have to tidy up. Nobody thinks of us cleaners, do they, dear? Perish the thought.
All in all, it wasn't the most useful conversation I could have overheard. I doubted the cleaners had anything more interesting to say.
I know just what you mean. Have you seen file LEW-006/EXW? First, he steals a crowbar.
And that's a T-1712 form straight away?
Exactly.
No respect for the patricians, spies and clerks. That's the trouble with this city.
Oh, the crowbar's only the start, believe me. I've got 2 counts of murder.
Ha! That's an FO86B just to get the list of forms you need.
Tell me about it. And as if that wasn't enough, he's only gone and died.
Oh, not another D2317E. I hate those.
Worse. A D66/004B.
Another murder? Oh, I haven't finished the paperwork from Cypher's death yet.
Still, I have to look on the bright side.
What's that then?
At least he hasn't come back from the grave.
Oof, I know what you mean. Those undead citizenship forms are the worst.
No consideration. That's the trouble. No consideration of us hard-working bureaucrats.
The clerks soon returned to their paperwork. I doubted the clerks would let slip anything useful. The door was locked. I thought I could make out voices, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. Silence. Perhaps I should try a different door. Locked. I could hear what I could only assume was some of the patricians' clerks talking.
I do wish people would bear in mind how much paperwork everything is for us.
I asked the watchman if he knew Mundy, but the name meant nothing to him. Well, I have some good news and some bad news for you. That's the good news. The bad news is, he's dead. I couldn't see how the watchman... So can you get me into the inner sanctum?
I can, provided we can find a time when the cult of Anu aren't there.
Are mooncalf's lot in there often?
All the time. And that's not all either. He sneaks away after each one. I think they've got a secret sanctuary somewhere.
I'd like to find that.
Actually, I'd quite like you to find it too.
Can't resist a secret, eh?
No, I'd just like to get in the way of everything Mooncalf does. Him and his big evangelical budget and hordes of out-of-tune followers singing and chanting at all hours of the day. He's gonna get his comeuppance, and anything I can do to speed it up suits me fine.
So you'll help me? When I gave him Mundy's description, he became more animated. I found some frayed rope in the rafters of the room where Mundy was killed.
Congratulations. What's that got to do with me?
I was hoping you could tell me.
You're optimistic.
Not at all. I figure you'd like me to stop asking you questions.
It wouldn't be my first wish, but it'd be in my top 10.
Tell me about the rope.
Why don't you tell me about the rope? You found it, not me.
Mencken wasn't going to risk incriminating himself under any circumstances. Once again, I'd have to worm it out of him. I found some frayed rope in the rafters of Mundy's room.
Good for you.
I thought it might have some bearing on the case.
I suppose I should mention it in the file.
So there is a file, then?
Well, not as such, but as soon as there is, I'll be sure to mention it.
These little details could clear my name, Nobby.
I suppose so.
Well, thanks, Nobby. You've been a great help.
Just doing my job to the best of my ability.
That's what I was afraid of. I doubted Carlotta could help me with that. Perhaps I just had to go back to Mundy's room and see if there was something I'd missed. Given that Horst seemed to think I'd killed Mundy, I should probably avoid giving him the idea that I was totally confused about it. I found some rope in the rafters where a man's body was found. Any idea what it means?
Did he have a rope around his leg?
Now you mention it, yes, he did.
Looks pretty certain that he was hung up by his legs then. Typical execution-style killing for some cults.
For which cults?
Most of them, actually. Especially if they're in a bad mood.
Malaclips had a good point. Mundy must have been hung upside down and then killed, which meant somebody must have cut him down at some point. Which unfortunately meant I'd have to investigate further. I'm not sure.
You'd better have a look, then.
The frayed rope in the rafters was the same as the rope around Mundy's legs. The rope that used to be tied to the grapple. That had to mean that Mundy was hung upside down and then killed. And that meant someone cut him down after he was killed. Curiouser and curiouser. There was no rope around his body. I was looking in slightly the wrong place. The frayed rope was certainly in the rafters. I couldn't see how that realization helped me, though. Frayed rope. There was some frayed rope in the rafters of Mundy's room. I hadn't completely fathomed its relevance. There had to be a connection between Mundy's murder and the frayed rope. I just hadn't found it out yet. My thinking was getting a little abstract. I preferred to stay in the concrete. Not literally, but you know what I mean. I had a hunch there was a connection, but I needed to go one step at a time. The frayed rope was from my grapple. It was the same rope that had been tied to Mundy's legs, but where was the rest of it? If there was a connection to the frayed rope, I couldn't see it. I found some frayed rope near Mundy's body. Any idea what it means? The inscription had read, Quod nescient eos interficit, fuchsia, magenta, aqua, light green, dark cyan, apple, cyan, teal, purple, lawn green, red, blue, maroon, navy, dark blue, dark brown, dark magenta, light red. The scent was extremely weak, and I didn't think it was important. The Grim Squeaker. Whatever it was 6 inches high, robed in black, and wielding a small scythe in one skeletal paw. I really needed to lay off the booze. But frankly, there was a more direct way of getting 2 conkers inside. Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. To mourn a mischief that is past and gone is the next way to draw new mischief on. We're only doing it until Big Fido gets back. I'd already asked about that. It didn't seem worth asking about that. I didn't have time to waste chatting to just anybody. I had a city to save. Back a page. Forward a page. Exit. Different area. But I'd have to be sure I could get up there first. Let's hope we don't meet again, Foyd. A perfectly ordinary bunk bed. Since that was who I'd learnt about that from in the first place, I didn't feel I had much to gain by going over old ground. I looked around to see Remora drawing a weapon. Assassins are damn good at what they do, but they're not allowed to kill innocent bystanders. I didn't know if it was bravery or stupidity, but I decided to stand between Remora and his target. Interrupting an assassin while he was working was a risky business, so I decided to ambush Remora with the old only answer questions with questions routine. When I went back to the mansion, the butler had some grim news for me. The Count had shuffled off his mortal coil in the recent disc-quake. He was sleeping the big sleep, pushing up daisies, crossing the final frontier, booking a vacation to the underworld. Basically, he was dead. Fortunately, he'd left provisions for me in his will. He'd pay my way to the end of the case, and more importantly, he was allowing me to continue to use the library. Well, what did it matter to him who used the library now he was gone? When you're dead, you were sleeping the big sleep, and nothing much mattered to you anymore. All the nastiness was behind you. For the rest of us, the nastiness was still all around us, and if I didn't stop that nastiness from crushing us all under its tentacles, we'd all be sleeping the big sleep. Frankly, I didn't think the afterlife would have enough beds. I was never going to get anywhere if I didn't learn to resist the urge to use the crowbar at every available opportunity. The warehouse design incorporated a handy ledge that made it easy for anyone jumping from roof to land there. There really wasn't much I could do to the ledge while I was on the ground. I reckoned the ledge had served its purpose. The ledge's role in the grand scheme of things was nothing more than to be the point where the wall met the roof. Frankly, I didn't think the watchman would let me get away with hiding two conkers anywhere near his beloved warehouse. I headed over to Pseudopolis Yard, but Nobby wasn't there yet. I decided to come back later. It seemed to be a cheap copy of Spinner's Rain, Cream, and Speed. I could tell it was art, because I couldn't make out what it was supposed to be. It was a landscape, not a portrait, I think, but I was certain there was nothing there. Two conkers. Frankly, he was lucky to be alive. Two conkers was in no state to talk to me. Two conkers was in no state to talk to me about that. The Saturnalia casino was all lit up. It certainly looked like a classy place to lose a lot of money. For the time being at least, Saturnalia was closed. Having a chalk outline outside just didn't put people in the mood to gamble. It was probably the only time in my life I'd had an effect on high society. Saturnalia was locked up tight. Even the trusty crowbar wouldn't be enough to get me into Saturnalia when it was closed. I doubted the building itself was that important. He showed me where the safety deposit boxes were, tucked away in a corner of the casino. Now all I had to do was find out which one Reagan's key fitted. I figured a really good private investigator could do a lot of painstaking research and work out which box belonged to Reagan. But I figured, hey, the guy's a dwarf. So I just tried all the lockers on the bottom row. After Carlotta had left, I sat alone in the cafe, thinking about my problems. As bad as it seemed, my life was still better than it was a few years ago. Back then, I would have sat alone in the cafe, drinking through my problems. Years ago, it would have been my dream to stand in the Café Ankh's wine cellar. So many barrels of fine wine. Even Chateau Hector, Year of the Weevil. My favorite vintage. I used to dream of Ilsa, too, from time to time. So when I walked in to find Ilsa there, I had to check I wasn't wearing my pajamas. Hello again, Ilsa. I can see I'm going to have to get used to finding you where I least expect. You didn't say goodbye at the casino. What happened to you? I'd said all that I was planning to say to him. Laredo made her way over to Horst's quarters and didn't look back. I had no idea what the two had to talk about, but I was sure it would lead to a new and exciting adventure, one even more complex and challenging than her last. For the time being, at least, Laredo was out of the way. As if things weren't bad enough, now I had someone willing to pay the Assassin's Guild for my inhumation. I would have to be extremely careful from now on, especially around the palace. It was over in a flash. The falchion was in my hand, and Horst was dead. I don't even know how it happened. I didn't want to give it to him, but he looked like he'd rupture a fault line if I didn't. He kept insisting that the box proved that Therma was alive, or at least that's my best interpretation of what he was trying to say. The celestial parsnip didn't seem to be pointing at anything in particular. If the flying moose was pointing towards anything, it wasn't in the city. To say that Gahuli, the vase of tulips, was pointing at something would be as big a stretch of the imagination as to say it looked anything like a vase of tulips. I didn't think Wesen the double-headed kangaroo was any help. It seemed to be pointing at someone's room in the unseen university, and that jeweled box in the carriage that presumably held the asp that poisoned Reagan. How did you and Malachite get separated? This sturdy-looking unlocker seemed in better condition than the others. Even as a human, I could smell something very disturbing coming from this particular unlocker. Given the smell of the unlocker, I was grateful it was locked. This unlocker seemed rugged, if slightly beaten up. I searched the unlocker, but found nothing I wanted to think too hard about. Unstable unlocker. Unlike the other unlockers, this one seemed to be levitating a few inches above the ground. Probably one of the students' cantrips that hadn't worn off yet. As for the unlocker's contents, the less said about them, the better. Carlotta had told me that only wizards could see Octarine, which explained why the board looked blank to me. She also said that as a wolf I could smell Octarine, which opened up a new avenue of inquiry. Under the list of subjects were the words, "You must read a chapter on each before the next lecture." There was definitely a connection between the books and what was written on the Octarine board. I slotted the trapezohedron into the sword and steered the flying machine towards the portal, pedaling as fast as my tired little legs could manage. As I approached the portal, lightning began to spark between it and the sword, lighting the sky like an explosion at Unseen University's high-energy facility. I kept flying onwards, the sky full of flame and thunder. When I made it out of the guild alive, I thought I was home free, but there was something wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I was in danger. I'm not a suspicious man, but I am a cautious man. I decided then and there to start running, and not look back until my office door was safely locked behind me. But something else had plans for me not to make it that far. After what I had to go through to get the sword, I had no intention of talking to the zombie ever again. I had to try and waste less time trying to make obvious connections. I felt so stupid, giving Horst the sword and staying with Ilsa as the troll disappeared into the night's fog. After we'd both calmed down, I told her everything that had happened. I learnt from a master. Well, not that animated, but more animated than he had been. Ledge. The books were all neatly indexed by a vast series of cards in a wooden case. It looked like the von Uberwalds were using an ancient version of Huey's octal system of indexing. It was complicated, but I reckoned I could at least use it to find out what books they had on a particular subject, and then wander around until I saw a bookshelf with the right number on it. I could mess up the filing system, I suppose, if I wanted the butler to eviscerate me with sarcasm the next time I saw him. A far better plan would be to use the index to look up a book on a particular subject. Horst still wasn't back at his quarters. I was beginning to wonder if he was coming back at all. Horst wasn't at his quarters. I was certain he was at Magdalen Bridge. Wherever Horst was, he wasn't at his quarters. I hadn't seen Horst since I arranged his meeting with Laredo. There was still no sign of Horst in his quarters. He could be anywhere. The watchman looked around nervously. I eventually persuaded the watchman to show me the ledger for the recent deliveries. Whirl told me how to play the game, something to do with the major arcana and the private arcana. The major arcana had strange names like the Fool, the Pyrophant, and the unbelievable expense of a slice of cheese. Essentially, it seems I just had to stay under 21 and get as high as I could. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I expected to lose my dollar anyway, so I didn't worry about it. But someone else at the table seemed pretty worked up about what I was doing. I lost my dollar, But I reckon I got value for money. And hey, the cards were pretty. It all seems pretty whimsical to me. Unlocker with disturbing aroma. Rugged unlocker. This locker seemed to wobble slightly. I don't know how long I wandered the streets. It's hard to tell which way is up when your world has been turned upside down. I ended up back where I started because I didn't know what else to do. Plus, my coat was in the coffin, and Ankh-Morpork is a bad neighborhood to be caught naked in. I haven't got anything to eat, if that's what you want. I haven't got any idea what's going on, either. What did you say? Do you know what's happened to me? I'm a werewolf. That explains what's happening to me. I thought somebody slipped something into my embalming fluid. I don't need your help. Well, I was. Then I was dead. And then I was... well, a werewolf, I suppose. I guess I spoke too soon. Maybe I do need your help. What's your name? How do you think I became a werewolf? So can I change between being a wolf and a man at will? At first I didn't know what to do, but Gaspode talked me through it. Then, when I could see the world in all its psychedelic glory, Gaspode started teaching me about the nose. There's a lot of colors. According to Gaspode, I could learn a lot from comparing different scents. I figured that could come in handy in my line of work. Assuming I could change back to being human, that is. I gave it my best shot. Are you the only dog on the streets, then? Tell me about the others. You've moved. Not while I'm awake. I guess Horst was busy with Laredo, because when I went to his quarters, there was no one there. Index cards. There were only 2 other libraries in Ankh-Morpork that I knew about, and one of those was in the Assassin's Guild. It turned out Nobby had come to let me out. I was speechless all the way back to the yard. I couldn't believe I was being released. Frankly, I could scarcely believe Nobby hadn't weaseled his way out of coming all the way to the palace to let me out. Nobby wouldn't tell me anything more, and I decided not to push my luck. Perhaps I should head back to the rooftops and check it out myself. Dog. The dog was small, bow-legged and wiry, and appeared to have every disease known to doggy kind, and several which I thought only sheep could catch. I would have shaken his paw, but I feared it would fall off. I wasn't an expert on dogs, but I thought that this black, thoroughbred dog was a Klatchian hound, also known as the Kelef Klatchani. Small, proud, and ruthless, the Kelef Klatchani were prized by dog breeders throughout the Circle Sea. What this one was doing out on the streets was anyone's guess. I thought about petting the dog, but there was something about the way he looked that made me think twice, maybe even 3 times about it. Cases, contacts and suspects. Contents, miscellaneous. More contacts and suspects. More murders. Murders. Temples and gods. The cult. Sapphire. The Mundy case. The sword. The Therma case. The von Uberwalds.
What a strange mind I have. Oh, no.
What a strange mind I have.